I only needed shelter, but something beneath that old register was waiting for me.
She was 19 and alone. No address, no family key, no winter coat worth keeping, just a tiny mechanic's satchel and $5.73 she had earned polishing brass knobs in a back hallway. And with that $5, she bought a condemned brass register shop on the south edge of Virginia City, Story County, Nevada, near American Flat, a place most county maps had stopped naming in 1941. The front door had swollen crooked in its frame. Rain came through 3 places in the tin roof. The county said the building had been closed since 1953 and was scheduled for demolition the following spring. But what nobody knew was that beneath the bolted pedestal of a solid brass cash register, in a hidden compartment that had not been opened in over 70 years, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Mae Eleanor Voss had been listening her whole life without knowing it. She listened the way other children ran, the way other children begged to be noticed, the way other children filled a room with their wants before anyone could ask what they needed. Mae listened to floorboards, to door latches, to the dry click inside a stove knob, to the small complaint of a drawer that had been pushed too hard for too many years. She listened to people also, but people were harder. They often said one thing in a clean voice and meant another in the way they folded a napkin, or looked toward a clock, or kept one hand upon the pocket where money rested. She was born in a mining town that had already spent its grandest words. Her mother, Laurel, worked laundry for the second-floor rooms above a boarding house in Carson City, where heat collected in summer until the wallpaper smelled of flour paste, and in winter the windows sweated with a damp that would not wipe clean. Mae remembered her mother mostly by her wrists, quick and pale under rolled sleeves, and by the sound of sheet corners snapped straight across an iron bed. There had been a father once. That was how people put it, softly, as if a father were a storm that had passed over a roof and left only a stain in the plaster. He had driven freight, or repaired pumps, or gone east for wages, depending on which adult had lowered a voice near Mae, and forgotten that listening children are still children. He did not come back. Laurel did not speak against him. She only kept one brown photograph in a Bible, and when Mae was 7, that Bible went into a box beneath the boarding house stairs with the other things no one could decide whether to save or throw away. Laurel took sick in February when the sage beyond town lay colourless under a hard crust of snow. Mae was sent to her mother's older sister Celia, who lived behind a livery office with her daughter, Maribel, in 2 rooms smelling of boiled coffee, hair tonic and damp wool. By the time the thaw came, Laurel had been buried under a plain stone, and the boarding house had rented the room to a man who sold patent liniment from a suitcase. Celia was the closest thing Mae had after that to a mother, though the word never settled right between them. Celia kept Mae fed and combed, kept her in school until the arithmetic teacher said there was no use wasting numbers on a girl who looked at window hinges during recitation. Celia signed forms, paid church dues, and told people Mae was grateful. She had a careful mouth, Aunt Celia did, one that could arrange itself around a kindness as precisely as around a complaint, but her eyes were always counting flour, coal, buttons, minutes, how much more one girl required than another. Maribel learned early to stand in the better light. Mae learned early to disappear beside the washstand while the grown women spoke over her head. She mended stocking runs with a needle so fine it seemed made of moonlight. She repaired the catch on Celia's sewing box with a bent hairpin. She opened a jammed bureau lock by feeling the shape of its refusal through the tip of a kitchen knife. These things did not make anyone praise her. They made them bring her more broken things. On Saturdays, when Celia could spare the work or had no better use for her, Mae walked uphill to the narrow house where her grandmother's sister lived behind a fence of silvered pickets and rabbit brush. Her name was Winifred Lark, though nearly everyone called her Aunt Winnie, whether related to her or not. She was a watch repairer's widow, a woman so thin and straight that even the shadows in her house seemed to mind their posture. Her hair was white by the time Mae knew her, But her hands did not tremble. They moved with the sober mercy of hands that had learned not to hurry. Aunt Winnie's kitchen table was never used for eating on Saturday mornings. The oilcloth was rolled back, the scrubbed boards covered with newspaper, and upon the newspaper she arranged saucers, tweezers, watch keys, magnifying loupes, narrow files, packets of emery paper, and square bottles with labels faded to brown. Mae would stand on the threshold until Aunt Winnie looked over the rims of her spectacles and said, as she always said, "Well, the clock's not going to confess by itself." Then Mae would wash her hands in cold water with yellow soap and sit. Those mornings gave her a country no one could take by deed or family vote. On Aunt Winnie's table lay the hidden citizenship of gears, pinions with teeth fine as eyelashes, barrel springs coiled with dangerous patience, pawls, clicks, ratchets, jeweled pivots, screws so small they vanished if a breath crossed them. Aunt Winnie taught her to name each part before touching it, because a named thing, she said, was less likely to be mistreated. She taught her that brass took warmth from the hand and returned it slowly. She taught her that steel could remember both violence and care. She taught her to lay every screw in a saucer according to its order of removal, because the world becomes cruel when a person assumes two little pieces are the same. The ritual never changed unless weather changed it. First, Aunt Winnie boiled coffee and warmed day-old biscuits in a cast-iron pan. Then she opened the west window an inch, even in cold months, because lamp oil and polishing rouge should not be breathed too deeply. Mae swept filings from the previous week into a paper twist and marked the day's work in a ledger with a black pencil. At 9, the first clock came down. At 11, they broke for biscuits. At noon, Aunt Winnie allowed Mae to polish one brass plate in circles no wider than $50. In the afternoon, if Mae had been exact, she was permitted to open the back of the smallest watch and let its works appear. There were rules. Never force a tooth. Never wind a spring with your face over it. Never set a part on bare cloth. Never call a thing ruined until you have cleaned it properly. Never use anger as a tool. Mae did not know then how much of her life was being built from these plain instructions. She only knew that the world was less loud in Aunt Winnie's kitchen. Even sorrow had to lower its voice among the clock hands and brass wheels. Once, when Mae was 12, she lost a screw from a travelling clock and froze with her hands lifted, as if guilt might fall out of them. She had been trying not to cry because crying in Celia's rooms brought practical questions, and practical questions could be sharper than scolding. Aunt Winnie did not comfort her. She got down on one knee with a lamp and searched the floor until the screw shone like a black seed beside the table leg. Then she placed it in Mae's palm. "Child, the small honest thing is what keeps the large thing true." Mae kept that sentence longer than she kept most objects. Aunt Winnie meant the screw, and the gear beside it, and the hand on the dial that would lie to a household if the hidden work beneath it lost its patience. But Mae came to understand that she meant people also. A clean ledger, a returned coin, a hinge set square, a silence that did not join a lie. The small honest thing was rarely praised. It simply held. When Aunt Winnie died, the clocks in her house were found stopped at different hours. Mae had been 17 then, old enough to stand at the back of the funeral parlour without being asked if she understood, young enough that no one thought to ask whether she had lost the only room where her hands made sense. Celia wore black gloves and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that had not been used enough to soften. Maribel stood beside her in a hat with a narrow veil, and watched the lawyer more closely than the coffin. There had been a will, people said. Then there had been another paper. Then there had been a question about Aunt Winnie's state of mind during the last winter, when her coal bills were late and she sometimes answered the door wearing 2 different shoes. Mae never saw the first paper. She saw the second only from across a desk where Maribel's husband kept his thumb resting over a line of signatures. The watch tools were supposed to come to Mae: the cherrywood chest, the brass loop with the cracked rim, the black ledger, the 3 clocks marked for repair, and the cigar box of spare springs. All of it vanished into inventory. The house was sold to a dentist from Reno who wanted the windows for the light. The clocks went to an estate room. The tools were spoken of as effects, then as miscellaneous, then not spoken of at all. Mae asked once, quietly, and Celia said grief made people imagine promises where none had been written. Maribel smiled into her teacup. It was a clean smile, pretty and bloodless. After that, Mae took work where she could find it. She scrubbed stairs at the courthouse, she sorted laundry pins in a hotel basement, she polished the brass rail at a saloon that had become a tourist restaurant, rubbing circles into the metal until faces passed in it like strangers crossing brown water. Men joked that she had a jeweler's hand. Women told her she would make somebody a careful wife, as if carefulness were only useful once harnessed to another person's table. Maribel became the sort of woman who wore perfume before breakfast. She had married a claims clerk named Edwin Pratt, and together they learned the delicate craft of paperwork, not honest paperwork, which has a stern beauty, but paper made to confuse, receipts copied with dates altered, statements folded so that one signature appeared to bless another page, envelopes kept until a deadline passed. Their rooms improved, Celia's rooms improved, Mae's corner grew narrower. The antagonism did not arrive with shouting. That would have been simpler and perhaps less damaging. It arrived as weather arrives, under doors and around loose windows. Maribel corrected Mae's speech in front of visitors, then apologized for being particular. She borrowed Mae's wages for household arrears and returned only part, with an account so complicated that asking about it made Mae appear greedy. She moved Aunt Winnie's remaining photograph from the mantel to a drawer because it made the parlour look funereal. She told neighbours that Mae was high-strung, that she had always been peculiar, that grief had fastened strangely on her. Edwin did less and somehow worsened more. He carried a silver pencil behind one ear and tapped it against his lower teeth whenever Mae entered a room. He asked for documents in a tone that assumed she had misplaced them: birth record, work receipts, Aunt Winnie's letters, the certificate from the trade school extension class where Mae had learned proper metal cleaning from a retired machinist. One by one papers left her satchel to be kept safe in Edwin's tin dispatch box. The box had a neat lock. Mae learned the sound of it closing. By the winter she turned 19, the boarding rooms Celia had held for years were no longer a refuge but a ledger waiting to be balanced against her. The price of coal had gone up. The landlord wanted steady rent. Maribel said everyone must begin being sensible. Celia sat by the stove, knitting one sleeve longer than the other, her needles clicking in an uneven rhythm that made Mae look toward the door. It was the 23rd of January, with sleet crossing the window glass sideways. Mae came in from the hotel basement carrying her little mechanic's satchel, the one Aunt Winnie had given her before the cherrywood chest was promised and lost. It was no larger than a schoolgirl's lunch bag, black leather worn grey at the corners, with two inner loops for tweezers and a pocket just deep enough for folded emery cloth. She had kept it under loose boards beneath her cot. That afternoon, it sat in the middle of the kitchen table. Maribel had placed beside it a brown envelope. Mae's hairbrush, 2 pairs of stockings, and the blue wool dress that no longer held warmth at the cuffs. Edwin stood by the stove with his hands behind his back. Celia sat in the rocker. She did not knit. That was how Mae understood the day had been arranged before she entered it. Maribel's face was powdered pale, and her wedding ring caught the stove glow when she lifted the envelope. "There's been a correction," she said, "about Aunt Winnie's intentions, about your place here, about several things." Mae looked at Celia first, because children look toward the person who signed the forms, who bought the shoes, who once held the basin while fever passed through them. Celia's eyes had gone to the window. Her mouth was folded inward. Outside, sleet tapped the glass as patiently as fingernails. Mae asked for her papers. Edwin tapped the silver pencil once against his teeth. "Lost in transfer," he said. "You should have been more orderly." Maribel pushed the satchel toward the edge of the table with 2 fingers, as if it had been contaminated by wanting. Then she opened the door to the back stair. Cold moved across the floor and lifted the corner of the envelope. "This house was never meant for your hands." 8 words. Mae counted them because counting was steadier than answering. No one touched her. No one needed to. The room itself had done the work. The satchel, the envelope, the open door, Celia's silence at the window. Mae bent and picked up the things that had been placed for her, not because they were enough, but because leaving them would make a scene, and scenes belonged to people who expected rescue. On the landing, she waited one breath for Celia to speak. The rocker creaked once. Then nothing. Mae stepped down into the alley with the satchel against her ribs and sleet brightening on her sleeves. Behind her, the door closed with the careful softness of a person trying not to wake the house. The first night she slept in a freight shed outside Carson City, between stacked crates of canned peaches and a rolled canvas that smelled of mule sweat. She had $4.91 after buying bread, 2 boiled eggs, and a cup of coffee from a woman who did not ask questions. In the morning, the cuffs of her dress had frozen stiff where sleet had soaked them. She walked north because walking south felt too much like circling. A truck driver took her as far as Mound House and let her ride in the back beneath a tarp stiff with old rain. He did not speak except to say the road was slick. At Dayton, she paid 15 cents for soup in a lunchroom with steamed windows and slept that night behind the Methodist church, under the wooden steps where wind moved less directly. A dog found her before dawn and licked salt from her hand until its owner whistled it away. 3 days later she reached Silver Springs with $3.11, 2 heel blisters, and a cough that sounded like paper tearing. She washed in a filling station basin until the attendant told her customers would talk. He said it without cruelty. That did not make it warm. In Fernley she mended a cafe screen door in exchange for oatmeal and a heel of ham. The owner's wife watched her reset the bent hinge pin with the back of a spoon and asked where she had learned to do such exact work. Mae said, "Kitchen table." The woman nodded, as though that explained a whole religion. She gave Mae a packet of saltines wrapped in wax paper and told her the nights were colder nearer the river. They were. Mae slept one night in a hay barn east of Sparks, high in the loft where loose chaff filled her hair and mice moved beneath the boards with a sound like rain, learning to whisper. Another night she sat upright in the Renault depot until a watchman told her benches were for ticket holders only. She bought the cheapest ticket she could afford, not to travel, but to hold proof in her hand until morning. That left her with $2.06. 6 weeks is not long when a person speaks of it after shelter has been restored. It is long when counted by dry socks. Mae counted by coins $1.72 after coffee and bread, $1.38 after a needle packet to repair her stocking before a day's work sorting linens, 94 cents after the rooming house woman in Reno charged her to sleep in a chair by the kitchen stove, 61 cents after a bowl of stew in Virginia City's Lower Road district where she had gone because someone said seasonal cleaning might open at one of the tourist shops. It did not. The owner looked at her hands, then her shoes, then the satchel, and said he needed someone presentable. She learned the hours of public warmth, courthouse corridors before the clerks noticed, church vestibules between services, the entry of a bank where brass doors held the day's heat until dark. Libraries were best because libraries had rules, and rules could sometimes protect a person who understood how not to draw the eye. The ad found her in the Story County Public Library on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky outside hung low over the Comstock Hills, and the radiators clanked like distant machinery. Mae had gone in to warm her fingers before trying the hotel kitchens again. She had 52 cents, the satchel, and a folded list of places that had already said no. Her dress had been brushed clean, but the hem told the truth. There was a table near the back where old newspapers lay clipped to wooden rods. Mae liked newspapers for the way they kept human wanting in columns, narrow and orderly. Rooms for rent, coal delivered, widow seeks sewing, tools wanted, watch lost between B and Taylor. She read them because no one stopped her, and because words cost nothing once printed. The notice was in a county disposal bulletin, half hidden beneath an announcement for a livestock auction. Property auction by sailed bid. Former mechanical register and amusement repair shop. South Virginia City Road. Story County. Structure unsafe. Contents included. Minimum bid $5. BYR assumes all back taxes for given up on transfer. Inspection not involved. Below that, in smaller print, were the office hours of the county clerk and the date by which bids must be entered. The date was that very day. Mae read it once standing. Then she sat and read it again. Mechanical register and amusement repair shop. The words did not make a promise. Mae had learned to distrust promises, but they had shape. They had teeth and springs and brass plates gone brown beneath dust. They had key stems, cash drawers, bell hammers, coin slides, screws arranged by length in a dish. They had work that did not care whether a girl had an address, only whether her hand could be steady. The librarian, a square woman in a grey cardigan, passed once and glanced at Mae's damp hem. She did not ask her to leave. That was one kindness. Mae folded the bulletin along its crease and carried it to the desk. "May I copy the address?" she asked. The librarian slid a pencil toward her. "Use the back of the church notice." Mae copied slowly because her fingers had stiffened from cold and because the act itself felt weightier than it should have. South Virginia City Road, former register shop. Minimum bid $5, contents included. Her last 52 cents lay in the bottom of her satchel. The $5 was sewn under the lining, kept from the first night because a person with no reserve becomes an object moved by weather. She had kept those $5 against sickness, against arrest, against the need to send a letter to a person who might not answer. Aunt Winnie had once told her to keep a true coin apart from spending money, because hunger could argue like a lawyer. Mae had listened. She had kept the bill flat under black thread, warmed by her side through haylofts, depots, vestibules, and one hard dawn beneath a loading dock. At the library table, with the bulletin beneath her hand, Mae took the satchel into her lap and opened the lining with the point of her smallest screwdriver. The bill came out creased but whole. George Washington's face had worn pale along the fold. She smoothed it once on the table, then put it inside the county notice and stood. Her knees had the uncertain feeling that came after too little food and too much decision. Outside the afternoon was already dimming in the way mountain towns dim early, shadows climbing out of alleys before the sun has properly gone. The county office was uphill, and she had not eaten since morning, but the road was there. Mae buttoned her dress at the throat, lifted the satchel strap over her shoulder, and left the library before warmth could persuade her to remain. She did not know the shop, she had not seen the road, she did not know that the clerk would study her name longer than necessary, or that the building waiting beyond town had kept its own counsel through decades of dust, vandals, and hard weather. She knew only that $5 could be a meal, a ticket, a bed for one night in a room with a lock, or it could be placed on a counter like a small, honest thing. By dusk, she was climbing toward the county clerk's office with the folded notice in one hand and the mechanic's satchel tapping softly against her hip. The courthouse lamps were already burning when the county steps came under her shoes. They gave off a tired yellow light through glass panels clouded by dust, and the stone beneath them held the day's cold so completely that each step seemed to answer her soul. Wind moved down from the higher streets, bringing with it the dry mineral smell of the Comstock Hills, a scent of rock, sage, chimney smoke, and old timbers that had once held up more money than most men could count without changing their voices. Mae paused at the lower rail, only long enough to press 2 fingers against the stitch she had opened in the satchel lining. The paper was still there. Flat. Real. Not yet spent. The bus had taken her only as far as the last reasonable stop. That was what the driver called it, without unkindness, when he let her down before the road climbed harder toward Virginia City. He had a red scarf tucked into his collar and a face roughened by wind through an open window. When she asked whether the county offices were much farther, he looked at her shoes and then at the road, and something in his expression became careful. 5 miles if you walk straight, he said. 6 if you lose the shoulder. Mae thanked him. Road freezes after dark. Yes, sir. He waited 1 second more, as if another sentence stood behind his teeth and decided not to come. Then the bus sighed, folded its door inward, and pulled away with 2 red lamps shrinking into the cold. The miles took what they wanted. At first she walked beside a ditch bright with ice, keeping to the gravel whenever a truck approached. Her satchel rode high against her ribs. The wind pressed her dress to her knees and worried loose threads at her cuffs. Beyond the road the hills rose with that strange Nevada barrenness which is never empty if a person has time enough to look. Rabbit brush, mine tailings pale as ashes, fence wire singing faintly, a broken wagon hub half buried near a wash. The black ribs of a structure whose purpose had been forgotten even by the men who once cursed inside it. By the 2nd mile her cough came back. By the 3rd the light had thinned to pewter. By the 4th the shoulder narrowed where snowmelt had cut a trough and frozen into hard glass. She slipped once and caught herself on both hands. Gravel entered her palm, gravel, throat, crav, crav, crow, grav, claff, clap. She wiped it on her skirt, because blood was warmer than the air and would dry soon enough. There was no room for panic when walking. There was only the next place to set a foot. A mile below town, she found an open hay barn set back from the road, its gate hanging from one hinge and its roof bowed in the middle like an old man's hat. She entered because the wind had begun to push sideways and because full dark on the road would make even careful drivers strangers to her. The barn held no animals. It held bales stacked in 2 slumped rows, a rusted harrow, a coil of rope stiff with age, and a smell of dry hay so dense it made the back of her throat ache with memory, for rooms she had not been permitted to keep. She climbed to the loft by a ladder missing one rung. The boards flexed but did not break there. Behind a low wall of hay, she made a hollow with both hands and sat inside it with her knees drawn up. The cold entered by degrees, not dramatically, not all at once. It came through cloth, through leather, through the little unguarded space between wrist and sleeve. At midnight, according to the cracked thermometer nailed near the loft door, the air stood at 17 degrees. Mae did not sleep deeply. She slept in pieces. Once she woke to hear coyotes calling from somewhere beyond the road, their voices thin and silver, and not lonely at all. Once she woke because her right foot had gone numb, and she spent several minutes rubbing it under her skirt until pain returned in bright needles. Near dawn, frost whitened the hay tips nearest the gaps in the wall. She left before the owner, if there was one, might come. The last mile into Virginia City rose steadily, passing weathered buildings that seemed to lean into their own legends. The sky cleared as morning came, hard blue above the ridge, and sunlight struck high windows before it reached the street. Mae walked under false front facades painted in colours softened by weather, past iron balconies and boardwalks, past a saloon sign with peeling gold letters, past a museum window where mining tools hung like artifacts from a vanished species of labour. The town was waking in narrow sounds. A bakery door opened and released yeast, sugar, and warm flour into the cold. A man swept grit from the entrance of a mercantile whose windows displayed wool socks, coffee tins, lamp chimneys, and a pyramid of canned peaches. Across the street, a barber shop pole turned slowly, though no customer yet sat inside. A telegraph and post office window glowed behind wire grating. Farther up, a cafe called the Silver Kettle had its chairs still upside down on tables while a woman in an apron washed the front glass with newspaper. 5 businesses. 5 signs that the town had not entirely surrendered to memory. Mae passed them with her eyes lowered, not from shame, but because looking too long at food and warmth could make a person misjudge the order of necessities. The courthouse came into view beyond a bend, square and sober, built of brick that had darkened with a century of winters. Its flag hung close to the pole. Its steps were swept clean. Inside, the air smelled of ink, coal dust, old paper, and floor oil. Sound changed there. The street noises closed behind her, and each footstep became a soft report along the hallway. To the left, a tax office with 2 desks and a brass spittoon. To the right, a recorder's room where bound ledgers stood behind glass. A sign painted in black letters pointed toward county clerk. Mae removed her cap, though it did little against the cold, and held it with both hands. The clerk's office was warmer than the hall, but not warm enough to make anyone careless. A coal stove stood in the corner with a scuttle beside it. Above the stove hung a calendar advertising a bank in Reno. Its picture showed a wheat field under summer light, an unlikely comfort in that dry room of deeds and disputes. Behind the counter sat a woman with iron grey hair braided into a crown at the back of her head. She wore a dark dress with a white collar pinned by a cameo, and small spectacles on a chain around her neck. Her hands were broad, reddened at the knuckles, and exact in their movements. She stamped one paper, sanded another, and closed a ledger before looking up. The nameplate on her desk read, MRS, ADA Bell, County Clerk. Not Ada. Not Miss Bell. Mrs. Ada Bell, as if the county itself had learned to stand when she entered. Yes, she said. Mae stepped forward. The satchel strap creaked. I came about the sealed bid notice. Mrs. Bell looked at the bulletin folded in Mae's hand. Then she looked at Mae's shoes, her hem, the loose skin under her eyes where hunger had made shadows. It was not an unkind inspection, it was county inspection. A road might wash out, a roof might fail, a girl might mistake a condemned building for mercy. All had to be accounted for. "That property is not fit for occupancy, Mrs. Bell said. "Yes, ma'am. It is listed only because the county has to offer it before demolition." "Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no guarantee of sound roof, sound floor, sound chimney, safe water, or legal access beyond the recorded parcel." "Yes, ma'am. You understand that contents included does not mean contents of value. It may mean refuse." "Yes, ma'am. You understand that once transferred, liability is yours. Injury, trespass, fire, collapse, nuisance complaint. Yours. Yes, ma'am." "Mrs." Bell leaned back a little. The chair gave one controlled creak. "You understand that I am trying to talk you out of this." Mae's fingers closed once on the folded notice. "Yes, ma'am." The clerk studied her a moment longer. "There are women who ask questions to hear weakness, Mrs. Bell did not seem to be one of them. She asked because a person stepping across a line should be made to see it first. "What is your intended use?" Mae had not prepared an answer grand enough to be called intended use. She had prepared only the truth, which felt too modest to survive in a county office. "Repair," she said. "What kind?" "Mechanical work. Registers. Clocks if there are any. Hinges. Coin slides. Small machines. Whatever can be made honest again." "Mrs." Bell's eyes moved to the satchel. "You are trained." Mae did not say what had been lost. She did not speak of a kitchen table or a ledger or a cherrywood chest that had passed from promise into absence. Those belonged to the silence she carried. And silence, if kept clean, could sometimes protect the last good thing inside a person. "I was taught," she said. "Mrs." Bell accepted the difference. She opened a drawer and withdrew a packet tied with red tape. County papers do not flutter. They settle with authority. This packet settled on the counter between them, grey, stiff, and faintly dusty along the fold. "Mrs." Bell untied it and set out the documents in order. Former proprietor listed as Archibald Pike. Deceased 1951. Last tax payment recorded 1950. Business license expired 1953. Parcel includes structure, rear lean-to, attached privy, and whatever fixtures remain within exterior walls. Does not include mineral rights under adjacent claims, if any remain active, which I doubt. Mae listened for the parts that mattered. Structure. Fixtures. Within walls. "Minimum bid is $5, Mrs." Bell said. "No one else has entered." Mae opened the satchel. The bill came out slowly because paper, once made sacred by necessity, resists being handled like money. She placed it flat on the counter. Mrs. Bell did not reach for it at once. Something passed over her face then. Not pity. Pity would have been heavier. This was older and more restrained, a recognition that certain payments cost more than their denomination. "You will need to sign here," she said. She turned the first page, dipped a pen, and offered it across the counter. The pen was black hard rubber with a worn nib. Mae took it carefully. Her hand shook once, so slightly that only a person who watched hands for a living would have seen. Mrs. Bell saw. She moved the inkwell closer and said nothing. The signature went down narrow, even, and upright. Mrs. Bell blotted it, turned the next page and indicated another line, then another, When all the signing was done, she took the bill and wrote a receipt in a ledger with columns so straight they seemed almost moral. The brass stamp came last. It stood on the corner of the desk like a squat little machine, black handle, round base, county seal worn bright at its highest points. Mrs. Bell slid the deed beneath it, aligned the paper, and pressed. The stamp struck with a dull, final weight. Mae felt it in her chest. Mrs. Bell sanded the seal, waited, then lifted the paper and read the description aloud. Lot 12, South Road District. Former commercial repair premises. Transfer recorded. Buyer assumes improvements, defects, and hazards. The words sounded less like welcome than like weather. Still, they were hers now. The clerk folded the deed into a long envelope and wrote the parcel number across the front. Directions, she said, and took a pencil from a jar. Follow C Street south until the boardwalk ends. Keep to the road past the freight shed. You will pass the old assay office ruins on your right. After that, the road bends toward Gold Hill. Do not take the first track. It goes to a collapsed shaft. Take the second, where 2 walnut trees stand close together. There is a leaning fence and a signboard if the wind has not taken it. The shop sits back from the road. You will see the roof before you see the door. Yes, ma'am. If the floor gives beneath you, get out. Yes, ma'am. If there is snow on the roof line, do not stand under the eaves. Yes, ma'am. If you smell gas, though I cannot imagine any service remains, leave at once. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Bell slid the envelope across the counter. Mae touched it but did not lift it yet. Paper again. A different paper. A paper that did not throw her out. The clerk's hand remained on her side of the counter, fingers resting near the ledger. Her eyes had returned to the signature. Voss, she said. Mae raised her head. The name sounded altered in that office, as if it had come through a doorway first and been asked for identification. Mrs. Bell looked at the ledger, then at Mae, then toward the back room where older records sat in fireproof cabinets. I knew a woman by that name, she said. Or near it. Winifred Voss Lark, though folks called her Winnie after she married. She brought watches here in the summers when the recorder's clock ran slow. Mae did not move. Outside the office window, a wagon passed, iron tire over frozen ruts. The sound went by in 3 heavy turns and faded. Mrs. Bell's expression changed at Mae's stillness. It became less official. She was exact, the clerk said. Could make a room ashamed of being careless. Mae placed both hands on the counter edge. The wood beneath her fingers had been polished by decades of other people waiting for judgments, fees, licenses, permissions, denials. For a moment she could not trust her mouth. She looked at the brass stamp instead, at the county seal reversed on its face. She taught me some things, Mae said at last. I thought she might have. Mrs. Bell reached into the top drawer again, but this time not for a form. She took out a smaller envelope, cream-coloured and bent at one corner. When Mrs. Lark came in, she sometimes brought a list of parts she was hunting: springs, pin screws, odd watch glass. Once, something for a national register, I think. She wrote names in margins. Your family name appears in our old trade license index, though not under this shop. I remember because my husband collected broken clocks he never intended to fix. She stopped there. Perhaps because too much kindness offered quickly can frighten the one receiving it. Mae swallowed. Did she know this place? Many repair people did, from what I heard. It served saloons, hotels, gaming rooms, and railway counters up and down the district, registers, coin mechanisms, brass amusements. A practical place, not elegant. Closed before my time at this desk. The words entered Mae slowly. Practical. not elegant. That suited better than beauty. Mrs. Bell took the deed envelope and, with a motion so ordinary it almost hid its mercy, placed inside it a second sheet torn from county stationery. On it, she wrote the directions more fully, then added the name of the hardware store and the cafe. If anyone asks, "The deed is recorded," she said. "If anyone says otherwise, send them to me." Mae understood that this was more than instruction. It was a door bolt. "Thank you." The clerk nodded once. "The county does not provide keys. I did not expect any." "No, Mrs." Bell said, with a gaze that rested briefly on the little satchel. "I suppose you would not." The hallway felt colder after the office, but the envelope beneath Mae's arm had weight enough to change her balance. She stepped outside into an afternoon sharpened by wind. Virginia City stood around her in its stubborn layers, 19th-century brick beside painted tourist fronts, sagging porches beside polished glass, old money beneath new dust above the town. Mine headframes marked the ridges like dark stitching. She followed the directions. C Street sloped away under her feet. The boardwalk, patched in places with new planks and in others worn silver by decades of boots, ran past a dry goods window, a closed apothecary with blue bottles arranged by height, and the Silver Kettle Cafe, where steam had fogged the lower panes. The woman inside looked up while lifting a tray of biscuits. Mae looked away first. At the edge of town, the buildings thinned. A freight shed stood with one sliding door half open, showing stacked crates and a hand truck left as if the worker had stepped out for only a minute, though rust told a longer story. Beyond it, the road narrowed and lost its confidence. Tire ruts hardened in the mud. A barbed wire fence ran crooked along the left, held by posts that had weathered to the colour of bone. The old assay office ruins appeared on the right, just as Mrs. Bell had said. 2 brick walls remained, roofless, their window openings empty and black. Wind moved through them with a hollow tone. Mae passed without slowing, though the place had the peculiar dignity of structures that have lost usefulness without losing witness. A dog began barking before she saw the house. It came from a fenced yard across the road, a rangy yellow animal with one ear folded and a voice too large for its chest. It ran along the fence, stopped, barked 3 times, then stood watching her with the cautious authority of a neighbour assigned to inspect all changes. Behind it, a man in suspenders lifted one hand from beside a woodpile. Mae lifted hers in return. He did not come closer. That was another kindness. Farther on, smoke rose from a low cabin with a green door. 2 children in red caps dragged a sled over bare patches of ground where the snow had thinned. They stopped to stare at Mae, not rudely but with the clear attention children give to any solitary figure who enters the geography of their afternoon. One whispered to the other. Mae kept walking. Then she saw the walnut trees. They stood close together at a bend in the road, black limbs bare against the winter sky, trunks twisted with age and weather. Their fallen leaves had made a dark mat beneath the thin snow, and last year's hulls lay crushed near the roots, staining the ground. Between them leaned a fence with 2 missing rails. Beyond the fence, set back farther than she expected, stood the shop. At first, she saw only the roof. It slanted under patched tin, dull grey where the weather had eaten away paint, rusted red along seams, and buckled near the rear corner where one rafter had clearly begun to fail. The building beneath was narrower than the notice had suggested, perhaps 24 feet across the front and 40 feet deep, though the attached lean-to added another crooked 12 feet at the back. Its walls were brick on the lower half, timber above, with clapboards that had once been painted a dark bottle green, and now showed in strips, flakes, and bare wood. A single brick chimney rose from the left side, capped with a crooked sheet of metal wired into place. The signboard hung above the front windows by one chain. P.I.K. A Sons. Mechanical registers. Coin devices repaired. The last line had nearly disappeared. Sun and dust had erased the smaller words until only repaired remained with any strength, as if the building had spent decades insisting on that one verb. There were 2 front windows, each tall and narrow, One had a crack running from corner to corner, the other was boarded from the inside with planks set unevenly, leaving a slit through which no light showed. The door sat between them, oak with a glass upper panel gone opaque from grime. A brass handle remained, green at the base, near the threshold. Wind had pushed leaves, paper, and a broken bird's nest into a small drift. Mae stood outside the fence for a long time. Not because she expected anything to welcome her. A building is not obliged to greet the person who comes with county papers. But she had lived for weeks in places that dismissed her by morning, and the sight of even a condemned wall standing within a boundary she was allowed to cross made her chest feel too narrow for breath. She opened the leaning gate. It dragged through frozen grass and stopped halfway. She slipped through the gap, walked the short path, and placed one hand on the door. The wood was cold, the brass handle colder. The latch did not turn at first. She set down the satchel, drew out a narrow steel pick and a tension wrench, then paused before inserting them. County paper, said hers. The door did not yet believe it. The lock was not complicated. Age had made it stubborn, not clever. She worked slowly, listening for the pins through metal dulled by rust and dust. Once, twice, a faint lift, a drag, then a giving way so soft it might have been breath. The door opened inward with a long complaint. The smell came first. Dry rot, dust, mouse droppings, old oil, cold ashes. Brass tarnish has no proper smell by itself, but the things used around it do, and somewhere beneath the dampened age lay the faint mineral tang of metal waiting under neglect. Mae stood on the threshold while the air changed around her. A building closed for years keeps its own weather. It releases it slowly, suspicious of the living. Light entered in a slant behind her. The front room had been a showroom once. A counter ran along the right wall, glass cracked but still in place, its interior holding curled paper tags, a tarnished bell, 3 cabinet keys, and a dead wasp nest shaped like grey lace. Behind it, shelves rose to the ceiling, crowded with objects too dark to identify at first. Registered drawers, brass plates, wooden boxes, coils of wire, a row of levers bound with string. Dust lay over everything, not as a covering only, but as a kind of second skin. On the left side stood 3 mechanical amusement cabinets, shoulder-high and narrow, each with a coin slot and viewing glass clouded by time. One advertised Fortune in Motion in faded red letters, another had painted horses racing around an oval track. The third bore no title, only a brass crank and a panel of numbers. Their silence felt less dead than withheld. The floorboards near the entrance were cupped with moisture. Mae tested them before committing weight. Aunt Winnie's rules, though unnamed now, still ordered her body test before trust, listen before force, step near the joist, not the stain. She crossed to the counter, opened no drawers, touched nothing more than necessary. First, know the room. Behind the showroom, a doorway without a door led into the workroom. The difference was immediate. The front room had been made for customers, even if customers had not crossed it in decades. The back room had been made for hands. A long bench ran beneath 3 windows filmed with dust, its surface scarred by burns, gouges, oil rings, and the clean circles left where heavy objects had sat for years before being removed. Above the bench hung outlines of missing tools traced in grime, ghost shapes of wrenches, clamps, screwdrivers, calipers. Pegs remained, labels remained. The tools themselves were mostly gone. Mostly. In one corner, under a canvas stiffened by age, stood a foot-powered polishing wheel with its leather belt cracked but not broken. A vise was bolted to the bench, jaws closed on nothing. Tin drawers lined the rear wall, each with a paper label in a metal frame. Springs, pawls, keys, bell hammers, drawer runners, counter wheels, odd screws. Mae did not open them, not yet. A room like this deserved order before desire. The ceiling sagged near the chimney where old water had stained the plaster brown. A stovepipe ran from an iron box stove into the brick wall. The stove door was closed, its latch rusted but whole. Beside it lay 3 short lengths of wood, grey with age, and a shovel whose handle had split. In the farthest corner, A narrow stair descended into darkness behind a half-door. Cellar, perhaps, or storage. Mae left it closed. The sounds came slowly once she stood still. A drip somewhere at the back, though no fresh rain had fallen. Wind worrying the loose sign chain outside. A mouse inside a wall, quick and busy. The faint tick of cooling metal from the stove, though no fire had warmed it in years. Or perhaps that was only the building settling around her arrival. She returned to the front room before dusk thickened. The door could be wedged from inside with a length of floorboard that had come loose near the counter. The cracked window needed covering, but she had no cloth to spare beyond what kept her warm. She found flattened cartons beneath the counter and set them against the worst draught. In a lower cabinet she discovered 3 newspapers from 1952, stiff and yellow, and used 2 to block the gap where wind entered under the door. The headlines belonged to another country of time. She did not read them. She searched for water and found none. The pump handle behind the lean-to moved, but brought up only a hollow clank and the smell of old iron. The privy tilted, but still stood. The rear yard held weeds, broken bottles, a rusted oil drum, and a view down toward the darkening hills where mine dumps caught the last light like piles of ash. When night came, the cold inside the shop deepened but did not move with the same cruelty as open air. Walls changed cold, that was something. A roof, even a failing roof, gathered a portion of sky and kept it off the body. Mae unrolled the newspaper she had not used, laid it over the least warped part of the front floor, and set her folded dress hem beneath her hip for padding. Her satchel became a pillow. The deed envelope went inside her bodice, flat against her undershirt, where warmth and paper could meet. She did not light a fire. The chimney had not been inspected, and she knew better than to trust a flue because she was hungry. She ate the last 2 saltines from the packet given in Fernley, letting each soften before swallowing. Then she listened. Outside the dog barked once and fell quiet. Somewhere in town a piano began and stopped after 3 uncertain measures. Wind moved through the walnut branches with a dry clatter. Inside, the 3 amusement machines stood along the wall like patient witnesses, their coin slots dark, their painted promises dim under dust. The cash registers, hulking shapes beneath canvas near the back of the showroom, held their drawers shut. Mae drew her knees toward her chest and tucked her hands under her arms. The floor was hard. The room smelled of iron, paper, old oil, and weathered wood. There was no one to call her name from another room. No chair creaking with withheld judgment. No pencil tapping against teeth. No ledger proving she had been a burden. For the first time in many weeks. No one could ask her to leave before morning. The old brass kept its silence, patient and waiting. As morning entered the shop through the cracked window as a pale blade across the counterglass, Mae woke before she understood where she had slept, not with surprise, but with the plain alarm of a body trained to rise before being found. Her shoulder ached where the floor had pressed bone. One hand had gone stiff beneath her cheek. The deed envelope, warmed all night beneath her clothing, had softened slightly at the corners. She touched it once, then sat upright and listened before moving. The building answered with the same restrained sounds. A loose chain outside. A faint scrape within the wall. The settling of boards that had taken her weight and decided, for the moment, not to object. She began with the door. The wedge had held. The newspapers along the sill had shifted but stayed. Light showed under the front boards in narrow strips, enough to mark drafts, not enough to make the room generous. Mae stood, rolled her shoulders, and crossed each plank as if learning the grammar of a new language. Near the counter, the floor gave a sour note when stepped on with full weight. Near the amusement cabinets, it creaked high and quick. Along the back wall by the covered registers, the boards were firmer, nailed into a joist that ran true from front to rear. She walked the pattern 6 times. By the 7th, she knew where not to trust. The first 3 days did not contain discovery. They contained survival, which has its own exact craft. She found a chipped enamel basin under the workbench and carried it to the pump behind the lean-to. The handle rose with a groan, fell with a hollow knock, and brought nothing for 9 strokes. On the 10th, rust-coloured water spat into the basin, then stopped. She waited, pumped slower, and after several minutes a thread of clearer water came up, cold enough to hurt her fingers. She did not drink at once. Aunt Winnie had taught her to let disturbed things settle, whether water or temper. Mae set the basin on a flat stone, watched grit sink, then poured off the top through a handkerchief into a jar she found in a crate. The taste was iron and earth. It was beautiful because it was water. The privy demanded less poetry. It stood behind the lean-to angled south, one hinge missing and the other held by two proud nails that had worked loose over time. Mae repaired the door with wire scavenged from a broken crate, twisted tight through the hinge leaf and frame, then set a flat stone against the lower edge so wind would not swing it open. Inside she found a wasp nest in one corner and left it alone because winter had made peace where summer might not. Each morning she marked the day by chores rather than by hope. Sweep front room. Test boards. Pump water. Clear mouse leavings from the counter with damp paper. Carry broken glass into a tin pail. Examine chimney from below without lighting fire. Sort what could cut from what could wait. Eat little. Work slower than hunger wanted. The shop changed by inches. Dust rose in grey veils and settled on her sleeves. Beneath the counter, she uncovered a stack of receipt books tied with cotton string, their pages brittle, their carbon copies purple and faint. In a drawer she found register keys, 11 of them, each tagged in handwriting that had browned with age. National 313, Barlow House, Red Dog Saloon, Miners Club, Pike Floor Model. The tags trembled when she breathed over them, as if the names still had some business left unfinished. She did not open the cash registers. Not yet. There were 5 of them under canvas along the rear wall, squat, ornate, and heavy in the way brass objects become heavy beyond their size, because they carry labour in their metal. 4 were ordinary enough at first glance, if anything in that room could be called ordinary. Filigreed drawers, amount keys, marble transaction plates cracked or missing, glass indicators clouded with grime. The 5th stood apart on a cast pedestal bolted through the floor, a full-bodied machine with a curved top, thick columns, and a row of keys frozen halfway down, as though some customer from the last open day still owed an answer. It had been covered with a canvas so stiff with dust that it lifted like bark. Mae uncovered only enough to see the face. The brass beneath was nearly black, except where dust had rubbed away from raised scrollwork and showed dull gold underneath. The keys were round, each with a paper amount beneath celluloid. 5, 10, 25, 50. No sale, paid out, charge. The drawer front bore no keyhole she could use. The crank on the side refused even the suggestion of movement above the amount indicators. A little glass window had cracked in a star pattern. Mae touched one key with the pad of her finger. It did not move. She left it alone. A forced machine will teach you nothing except your own impatience. On the 3rd afternoon, with the front room swept clean enough to show the worst stains and the back bench cleared enough to hold tools, Mae walked back into town carrying a list in pencil on the torn edge of a county envelope. The walk was shorter without sleet and longer with hunger. The yellow dog watched her pass but did not bark this time. The man by the woodpile lifted 2 fingers. Mae lifted 2 fingers in return. The hardware store stood beside the mercantile, narrower than its neighbour and darker inside, with windows crowded by lanterns, mule shoes, coils of rope, enamelware, and 2 sled runners propped like crossed bones. A bell above the door rang once when Mae entered. Heat came from a pot-belly stove surrounded by 3 mismatched chairs, all empty. The place smelled of kerosene, nails, seed packets, leather harness, oiled wood, and the sweet sharpness of new rope. Behind the counter stood a man with a white beard squared off under his chin and eyebrows so heavy they gave his face a permanent weather report. One sleeve of his flannel shirt had been patched at the elbow with corduroy. His right thumb was missing its tip above the nail, an injury long healed and used without comment. He was fitting a washer onto a bolt and did not look up until the door settled closed. "Help you." It was not quite a question. Mae placed her list on the counter. I have taken over the old register shop on the South Road. The man looked up then. His eyes were pale brown, clearer than his beard led a person to expect. He read her face, then the satchel, then the list. His gaze did not linger on the worn hem or the thin coat. Mae noticed and was grateful in the private way. One is grateful when spared. Name, Mae. Edwin Rusk, he said, touching 2 fingers to the counter as if laying down his own receipt. Rusk Hardware. He read the list. Lamp oil. 3 panes glass later. Not today. Stove blacking. When possible. Nails assorted. Wire. Rags. Fine emery. Kerosene. Kindling. Mouse traps. Chimney brush. If used, lye soap. 1 small tin of penetrating oil. You starting with heat, he said, with making sure heat won't burn the place down, that earned the faintest shift beneath his beard. Better answer. He pulled the list closer and made marks in the margin. Chimney brush loan, if returned. Rods too. You will need a bucket and a soot cloth. Stove pipe may be packed. Do not trust old mortar above the smoke shelf. No, sir. You have cash. Mae's fingers went once to the satchel strap. Some is not a number I can put in a ledger. She lowered her hand. There were 47 cents in her pocket, plus the few coins she had not yet allowed herself to count twice. A smaller person inside her wanted to leave before the arithmetic could humiliate her. But the shop had a chimney, and cold had no respect for pride. Not enough for all of it. Rusk leaned back and folded the list along one crease. He looked toward the pot-belly stove as if someone seated there might advise him. No one did. You know how to keep accounts? Yes, sir. You write a hand I can read? Yes, sir. You lie badly. Mae did not answer. He opened a counter ledger bound in cracked red cloth. With his pencil, he drew a line beneath the last name and wrote, in block letters, Voss, Rochester Shop. Then he turned the ledger so that she could see it. The column headings were date, item, charge, payment, balance. I allow credit for work people intend to finish, he said. Not for dreamers. Not for drunks. Not for men who begin sentences with next week. You bring payments when you can. You do not vanish. No, sir. If you vanish, I will speak ill of you to Mrs. Bell. I won't vanish. Rusk looked at her again, more closely than before. That sounded like you meant it for someone else. Mae kept her eyes on the ledger. Maybe I did. He accepted that without touching it. From beneath the counter he drew a narrow booklet, its cover stained with oil and one corner gnawed by mice. The title read, Home Repair for Mining Camp Structures. County Extension Series, 1938. Beneath the title someone had written in pencil, read twice before climbing. Free, Rusk said. Belonged to a fellow who bought nails and returned advice. Mae took it as carefully as she would have taken a watch glass. I'll return it. No. You use it. If it saves me from hearing your roof came down because you guessed, we are even. He moved through the store with economical purpose, placing items on the counter and saying prices aloud, not to shame her, but to make the ledger true. 1 pint lamp oil, 11 cents, small bundle kindling, 8 cents, charged, £2, 8 penny common nails, 14 cents, £1/2 4 penny finish nails, 9 cents, annealed wire, 6 cents, tin of penetrating oil, 22 cents, emery cloth, 3 sheets at 3 cents each, lye soap, 7 cents, used bucket, 12 cents, chimney brush and rods, loaned no charge if returned clean, flour sack rags, no charge because they were too torn to sell. 3 mouse traps, 15 cents. 1 box safety matches, 5 cents. The total came to $1.18 charged, with 23 cents paid in hand. Rusk wrote the balance without comment. Then he tore a second sheet from a pad and copied the chimney instructions in a blunt script. Cover stove opening. Brush from top, if safe. From bottom, if roof unsafe. Remove pipe. Inspect elbow. Scrape creosote. No fire until draft tested with paper twist. He underlined no fire twice. Can you climb? He asked. Yes. Can you judge rotten tin? Some. That means no. Work from inside first. Mae nodded. At the door, with the bucket hanging from one hand and the brush rods tied against her shoulder, Rusk called after her. Girl, she turned. The old shop had a register near the back. Full brass. Bigger than sense. Mae held still. Do not try to move it alone. I wasn't planning to. Good. Planning not to die is the first repair. The bell rang behind her as she stepped into the cold. That afternoon, she began the chimney. She did not climb the roof. The roof would have to earn that trust later. First, she cleared the area around the stove, laying flour sack rags over the warped floorboards and setting the used bucket close. The iron stove had a square body and short legs, with a cooking plate on top and mica windows clouded brown. Its door resisted. She treated the latch with penetrating oil, waited 1 full hour while she cleaned mouse nests from the lower shelves, then tried again. The latch lifted. Inside lay old ash hardened by damp into grey cakes. She removed it with a broken spoon and the small shovel, filling the bucket half full before reaching the grate. Beneath the grate she found 2 square nuts, a burnt button and the delicate skeleton of a mouse. She carried all of it outside. The mouse she buried under the walnut leaves, because Aunt Winnie had once said any creature that shared a roof deserved at least a little dirt. Then came the stovepipe. The first elbow was wired in place with twisted baling wire. The second had been sealed with stove cement that had cracked into scales. Mae loosened what she could, tapped gently with the handle of a screwdriver, and felt the pipe give by fractions. Soot fell in soft black sighs. She tied a rag over her mouth and worked with both windows opened despite the cold. The air turned bitter with creosote, a tarry smell that clung to the tongue and made the eyes water. The pipe came free just before dusk. A plug of soot and nesting material slid out with it, striking the rag-covered floor in a dark clump. Twigs, feathers, hardened flakes of creosote glossy as broken coal, a dead beetle husk. Mae crouched and examined the opening with her lamp angled low. The flue beyond narrowed into blackness. She did not hurry. For 2 hours the next morning she worked the brush up from inside, rod by rod, turning clockwise, drawing down, turning again. Soot fell steadily. Twice the brush caught and would not move. Each time she stopped, breathed through the cloth, backed it down 1/2 inch, turned and tried again. Forcing bristles against obstruction could wedge them solid, and then she would own a colder problem than before. At the smoke shelf, the creosote had hardened into ridges. She scraped with a bent strap of iron found in the lean-to, holding the bucket beneath until her forearms trembled. By noon, the workroom looked as if winter had burned and left its shadow inside. Mae washed her face at the pump. Black water ran down her wrists. Her fingernails stayed dark. The third pass brought fewer flakes. The fourth, almost none. She tied a small mirror to wire and angled it into the stove throat. With the lamp behind her, she could see up just far enough to catch a pale vertical glimmer at the top daylight. Thin, broken by crooked metal at the cap, but daylight all the same. She reassembled the stovepipe with new wire and what remained of the old stove cement softened by heat from her hands. It was not pretty. Pretty was not the first virtue. Sound was. Before lighting anything larger than paper, she tested the draft with a twisted scrap from the 1952 newspaper. She opened the stove damper, cracked the rear window an inch, lit the paper, and held it near the open door. The flame bent inward. Smoke drew up, hesitated once, then disappeared into the throat. Mae watched until the ash collapsed. Only then did she build a fire the size of 2 cupped hands. Kindling first, a twist of paper, a shaving from a broken crate, one thin stick, then another. The stove clicked as heat entered iron that had been cold for decades. It gave off an odour of dust, oil, old ash, and awakening metal. Mae sat on her heels with both hands lifted near the open door, not close enough to burn, close enough to feel warmth arrive, as if from a country she had not been permitted to visit. The first hot meal was not worthy of a menu, but it was worthy of memory. A tin cup of water set on the cooking plate. A handful of oats from a paper packet Rusk had slipped into the bucket without listing. Salt from Fernley's wax paper parcel. When the oats thickened, she stirred them with a screwdriver handle cleaned 3 times and ate from the enamel basin after rinsing it with boiling water. The food was thin, it was plain. It warmed the path down her throat and settled in her stomach with such gravity that she had to close her eyes for one breath. The shop smelled different after that. Not restored, not safe, but less abandoned by the living. With heat possible, Mae began the inventory of the workroom properly. She ruled pages in an old receipt book and made columns: location, object, condition, action. Her handwriting steadied as the list grew. There is mercy in inventory. It turns ruin into tasks. North bench, 1 bench vise, jaws rusted but aligned, oil brush test, 1 hand drill missing chuck key, search drawers, 3 calipers, 2 brass, 1 steel, all stiff, 1 cracked oil stone, 1 bottle shellac, dried, 4 wooden trays with screws unsorted, 7 gear blanks wrapped in newspaper, 2 register drawbells tarnished, 1 bell hammer with broken spring, 12 glass amount windows, 3 usable, roll of felt, moth damage, 2 brass tubes, 1 spool copper wire, 1 box marked coin slides, contents present but dirty, 1 spring winder incomplete, 1 polishing wheel, belt cracked, treadle free after oil, 1 bench lamp, no chimney, 33 paper tags blank, south wall drawers, springs, mostly rusted but many salvageable, pawls, 6 sizes, Ks, mixed, tags detached, bell hammers wrapped in cloth, drawer runners, brass and steel, counter wheels, ivory celluloid numbers yellowed, ODD screws, true to its label and therefore the most honest drawer in the room, lean to broken chair, coal scuttle with 2 lumps remaining, crate of cracked glass, box of rags 2, mouse-eaten for wiping but useful for blocking drafts, 3 lengths pipe, 1 ladder unsafe, 1 ladder rail, usable as brace, 2 planks with nail rot, 1 rusted sign bracket, 1 half-sack lime hardened at edges, empty bottles, a child's marble, blue, front showroom, 3 amusement cabinets, 4 covered registers, 1 pedestal register, frozen, counter cabinet, receipt books, loose tags, 2 chairs, Vone repairable, cast iron floor safe, door open, empty except dust and a penny too corroded to read. She saved the registers for last. By then it was late afternoon, and the stove had settled into a bed of coals. Light slanted low through the cracked window, striking dust in the air and turning it briefly visible, each mote lifted and held. Mae pulled the canvas from the first register and set to examination without attempting operation. The first was a national with a decorated brass case, drawer missing, keys stiff but not frozen. The second had suffered worse, its marble plate broken and its top bent by something heavy. The third was smaller, perhaps used for a cigar counter, with 5 amount keys and a no-sale lever. The fourth had been stripped of parts, its casing still useful, its soul elsewhere. The fifth waited under its partial cover. The full brass register on the pedestal was larger than the others by almost half. Its case had no separate wood base. Brass columns descended into a bolted plinth, and the plinth itself sat on a square cedar platform, stained nearly black at the edges. The whole machine seemed less placed than installed, as if the floor had been built with its weight in mind. Mae crouched and examined the bolts, 4 visible, thick-headed, slotted, green with oxidation, each passing through brass feet into the wood below, but the 2 rear bolts were wrong. Not wrong in a way most eyes would notice. They were cleaner in their slots. Mae took the lamp closer. Dust had gathered around all the bolts, but the rear pair had a faint circular disturbance, old yet discernible, where a tool had once slipped or turned. She touched the front bolt with 1 finger, then the rear. The rear held a slightly different chill. Less corrosion. More oil in the seam. She sat back on her heels. Machines lie only when people make them lie. Otherwise, they tell the truth in wear. She began with sound. From her satchel she took a small brass-handled screwdriver and tapped lightly on the front left column. The note was dull but even. Front right, the same side panel, slightly higher, drawer face, hollow behind, plinth, thick and flat. Then she tapped the cedar platform at the front edge. Wood answered. She tapped the left side. Wood again, dense from age. At the rear, beneath the pedestal lip, the sound changed. Not hollow exactly. Waiting. She tapped again, softer. The note had a contained depth, as if a shallow chamber had been packed with something heavy enough to shorten resonance. Mae moved the lamp, lay on her side despite the dirt, and looked beneath the overhang. There, half hidden behind dust and the shadow of the rear foot, was a round cedar disc no wider than a saucer, set into the platform so precisely that its seam disappeared unless light found it from the side. A plug. Her mouth went dry. She did not touch it at once. Instead she stood, went to the pump, drank half a jar of cold water, and returned. Finds made in hunger can grow larger than themselves. Finds made in fear can be broken by hands that want proof too quickly. She cleared the area. Canvas folded. Tools laid out. Lamp set on the floor. Chimney cleaned. Wick trimmed. Penetrating oil uncapped but not applied. Receipt book opened to a new page. She wrote, pedestal register, rear platform anomaly. Cedar disc. Do not force. Then she tested weight. The machine would not move when she pushed with both hands. Not a fraction. She set 1 shoulder lightly against the side and felt only the floor answer beneath her feet. Perhaps bolted. Certainly. But more than bolted. It had the stubbornness of mass below its visible body. She examined the keys. The row remained frozen halfway down, but a register mechanism jammed in operation should not make the pedestal heavier. She removed the cracked top glass carefully and looked inside with the lamp. The amount indicators were coated with dust. A spider had died between the 10 and 25 flags. The main gear train was visible but locked by hardened oil and a bent stop arm. Ordinary enough. Difficult but ordinary. The anomaly was below. The cedar disc had a narrow pinhole at its centre. Mae tried the smallest register key from the drawer tags, too large. She tried a watch key from her satchel, too square. She tried the tip of a broken awl. It entered but did not catch. Then she remembered the cabinet keys in the counter display, each curled with green corrosion and tied by a paper tag gone blank. She cleaned the smallest with oil and emery, working the bit gently until its cuts showed. It entered the pinhole almost fully. Almost is a dangerous word in a lock. She withdrew it, filed 1 burr, invisible to anyone but her fingertip, and tried again. This time it seated. There was no turning motion. Instead, when she pressed inward, something clicked beneath the disc. The cedar plug rose the thickness of a fingernail. Mae stopped. The shop held still around her. She slid the awl under the lifted edge and eased the disc upward by degrees. The wood resisted with old wax, then came free, releasing a smell that did not belong to dust or oil. Cedar, paper, dry cloth, sealed air, Beneath the disc was an iron ring, folded flat into a recess. Mae lifted it with 2 fingers. The rear half of the cedar platform did not open like a lid. It slid. Not easily, not completely. She had to clean the track with a brush, oil both edges and work it back and forth 1 patient inch at a time. Her knees went numb, the lamp smoked once and she trimmed it again. Outside, evening lowered. Inside, a hidden tray emerged from beneath the register pedestal, carrying with it the weight of a decision someone had made long before Mae was born. The tray held packages wrapped in oiled cloth. 5 of them, set tight together, with a 6th long object wrapped separately in a rag darkened by time. There was also a small tin box, square japanned black, its clasp sealed with hardened wax. On top of the packages lay a folded paper, but it was tied shut with blue thread and marked in ink that had faded brown. Mae did not untie it. Not that night. Not yet. First, the packages. She lifted the smallest heavy. The cloth crackled where oil had dried. She set it on the cleared bench, opened the knots with an awl rather than cutting them, and folded back the layers 1 by 1. Inside lay tools, not money. Heirloom tools. A brass loop with a cracked rim. 3 screwdrivers with ebony handles worn hollow by fingers. A pair of tweezers fine enough to lift a hair. A staking set, incomplete but carefully wrapped. A spring winder with 2 arbors, a burnisher polished dark at the grip. On each handle, near the ferrule, was a tiny stamped mark. A crescent gear with a dot at its center. Mae touched the mark and could not breathe for a moment. The second package held raw material. Brass sheet, thin and flexible, a bundle of blue tempered clock spring, tiny rods of steel, blank key stems, 2 squares of red felt, a packet of celluloid number tiles wrapped in wax paper, 3 lengths of fine chain. Useful things. Kept things. The third package held books, not printed books but ledgers, repair notes, diagrams, measurements of registers by maker and model, a list of spring tensions by draw weight, directions for polishing brass without removing maker's marks, drawings of coin slides used in gaming cabinets, with warnings in the margins: do not overfile, check gravity drop, never polish contact faces too smooth. The fourth package held papers she did not yet read closely, only enough to see that they were legal in nature. A deed copy, a survey, a contract folded around a blue ribbon. The top page mentioned a mining parcel behind the South Road district, but the language was dense and old, and Mae had learned that legal papers, like clocks, punished the hand that rushed them. She placed them aside, still folded beneath a clean rag. The fifth package was the heaviest. Coins. They were not loose. They had been stacked in paper rolls, then wrapped in cloth, then sealed inside another layer of waxed canvas. Many rolls had split with age, spilling silver edges into the lamplight. Mae knew coins by touch as much as sight, and these had the particular cold dignity of old silver, Morgan dollars worn and unworn, some from Carson City, the CC mint mark, small and powerful beneath the eagle, others from Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco. There were $half too, Walking Liberty and Barber, and smaller stacks of mercury dimes tied with cotton. She did not pour them out. She made a count the only way she trusted. Slowly. By type. By roll. By visible date. By likely numismatic value noted later. Not guessed by hunger. Face value first. Collector's worth separate. She used the receipt ledger, ruling columns until the page resembled a clerk's book. Morgan silver dollars, 482 coins, including 79 Carson City strikes. Face value, $482. Estimated collector value, unknown, likely much more. Peace dollars, 116. Barber halves, 92. Walking Liberty halves, 148. Mercury dimes, 310. Indian head cents, 2 full rolls and 23 loose. V nickels, 41. 3 gold pieces were present, wrapped separately in chamois. 2 $5 Liberty heads and 1 $10 Indian head. Tucked under the gold was a paper from a Reno coin dealer dated 1949. handwritten and unsigned except for initials. Conservative replacement value, $60,037 if sold carefully, not in haste. Below that, in a different hand, do not sell all. Silver is a witness. Mae copied the amount exactly, $60,037. The number did not enter her as wealth. It entered as danger first, then as heat, then as responsibility so large that she set down the pencil and folded her hands under the edge of the bench to stop them from shaking. The long rag-wrapped object came next. Inside lay a military medal in a narrow case, dark blue velvet worn thin at the hinge. The medal was bronze, its ribbon faded but intact, and pinned beneath it was a tag written in the same brown ink as the folded letter. PVT. Elias Voss, 1864. Wilderness. Returned by Capt. H. Bell after the war. Mae read the tag once. The room around her seemed to draw back. She knew the war. Everyone knew it in the general way as a terrible old division printed in school books and carved into cemetery stones, but the date on the tag made it no longer general. It made it a man's jacket, a man's blood, a captain's hand carrying something home because the body or the hour or the road would not permit more. Bell. Mrs. Bell's name rose in her mind. But she did not follow it. Not yet. Too many threads at once can knot the hand. The tin box remained. Its wax seal bore the same crescent gear mark stamped into the tool handles. Mae held it under the lamp. The clasp was simple, but the wax had been placed not to lock out thieves, only to show whether someone had entered before the intended person. She warmed the blade of her smallest knife near the stove, not in the flame, and softened the wax enough to lift it whole. Inside the box lay three things: a folded letter tied with blue thread, a brass key with an unusually wide bow, and a small photograph wrapped in tissue. The photograph had silvered at the edges. It showed a woman standing in front of the very shop. Though the sign was newer then and the windows bright, she wore a dark skirt, a white blouse and a work apron. One hand rested on the same pedestal register, polished then to a high gleam. Her face was not Mae's face. Not exactly, but the bones had a conversation between them. The set of the mouth, the patient distance between the eyes, the careful hand laid flat on brass. On the back, in faded pencil, E. Voss at Pike Shop. Summer work. 1903. Mae placed the photograph beside the medal. Then she reached for the letter. Her fingers stopped at the thread. The shop had grown dark beyond the circle of the lamp. The stove gave a low sound as the last coal collapsed outside. Wind moved through the walnut trees, and somewhere down the road the yellow dog barked once, then twice, then ceased. Mae could see the folded letter clearly. She could see the first line pressed faintly through the paper where ink had rested for decades. She wanted to open it with a hunger sharper than the hunger for food. Instead, she tied the thread back exactly as she had found it. Some things should be read in morning light. That was not fear, or not only fear, it was respect. Her life had changed several times in rooms where papers were opened by other people before she understood their meaning. This paper would not be taken in darkness. It would not be rushed, because need stood beside it tapping a silver pencil against its teeth. She returned each coin to its cloth as best she could, though the split rolls would need new paper. She set the tools in order on the bench, covered the legal papers with a clean flour sack, placed the medal and photograph inside the tin box, and laid the sealed letter on top. The tray beneath the register could not be closed fully while she still needed to inspect its track, so she covered it with canvas and set 2 empty crates before it. Then she put on her thin coat and went outside. The cold met her with clean force. Night had settled over the south road, and the town lights behind her climbed the hill in scattered squares. Above, the sky had cleared. Stars stood hard and innumerable, not gentle but exact. The walnut trees moved against them with black fingers. The old pump gleamed faintly at its handle where her hand had polished frost away over 3 mornings. Mae walked beyond the lean-to to where runoff from the hill crossed the yard in a shallow ditch. During the day it had been only mud and ice, but at night the thin water caught starlight and carried it in broken strips. She crouched beside it, listening to the small persistent movement. Not enough water to be called a creek, not enough to matter on any map, yet it moved downhill with the same obedience as every river. She washed her hands in it, though the cold bit deep. Black creosote, coin dust, cedar oil, and the dark residue of old cloth loosened from her fingers and disappeared into the narrow current. She did not weep. The night did not ask that of her. She only stayed there until her hands ached and the first numbness warned her to stand. Back inside, she did not touch the letter again. She banked the stove as well as she could with the few sticks remaining, wrapped her satchel strap around her wrist, and lay on the floor near the workroom threshold, closer to the hidden tray than to the door. The shop seemed altered now, not louder, not warmer, but inhabited by layers she had not been able to hear the night before. Names pressed against the walls, work marks weighted under grime. The cash register stood in the dark with its frozen keys halfway down, no longer merely broken, no longer merely a machine. Somewhere beneath fear, a steadier thing took root. The old brass kept its silence, patient and waiting. Morning came without softness, but it came clean. The first light touched the workbench before it touched the floor, finding the tins, the wrapped tools, the medal case, and the sealed letter where Mae had left them in careful order. The stove had gone out some time before dawn. A skin of ash lay over the last coals. Frost had whitened the lower corners of the front window where her newspaper did not quite meet the frame, and the air inside the shop had the dry ache of a room that had kept a body alive without ever promising comfort. Mae rose slowly. Her right hand was cramped from holding the satchel strap through sleep. She opened and closed her fingers until feeling returned, then folded the floor papers, shook dust from her skirt, and fed 3 thin pieces of crate wood into the stove. The match flared with a sulphur smell, then steadied. She waited for the first upward pull of draught before closing the door. Only after the chimney took the smoke did she turn toward the letter. It lay on top of the tin box, tied with blue thread, faded almost grey. The paper was thick, creamy once, browned now along the folds. Whoever had folded it had done so with the flat of a patient hand, pressing each crease clean, then tying the thread around it twice. The ink had not bled. The letters visible through the outer page were upright, narrow, and exact. Mae knew that kind of hand. Not the same as Aunt Winnie's. No 2 hands are the same, not if a person has spent enough hours reading repairs in scratches, pressure, slant, hesitation, but the kinship was there, in the measured downstroke, in the way the writer left room between words, in the refusal to waste ornament where meaning had work to do. Mae set the kettle cup on the stove with water enough for heat, not tea. She washed her hands, dried them on the cleanest corner of a flour sack, and moved the lamp closer though daylight had entered. Then she loosened the blue thread, placed it in a coil beside the tin box, and opened the letter along its original creases. The first line waited alone at the top. "My dear one, whoever you are." Mae sat, she read. "My dear one, whoever you are. If this letter has come into your hands, then the brass register has kept its duty longer than I dared hope, and you have either patience enough to hear a hidden thing, or need enough to look where others did not. Both are honourable conditions. I write from a room at St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco, under the care of Dr. Lionel H. Mercer, who has told me with professional gentleness that the growth in my lung is not the sort that yields. He believes I may have months if I spend them carefully. I have spent enough of my life carefully. I intend to spend the remainder truthfully. My name is Elspeth Voss Pike. I was born in 1878 in Virginia City, daughter of Matthias Voss and Ruth Bell Voss. My father was born in 1846 in Hamburg and came west after the war with 1 trunk, 2 files, and a temper he tried to use only on metal. My mother was born in 1852 near Placerville, daughter of Elias Voss, who served in 1864 and did not come home whole, and Naomi Bell, whose people crossed from Missouri to California when the roads were still an argument. Before them was Johann Voss, a clockmaker in Bremen, and before him, so family says, a maker of locks, though family sayings are only useful when the work itself bears witness. We kept to small mechanisms because large machines belonged to men with capital and large failures. Clocks, till drawers, fare boxes, coin slides, hotel bells, assay scales, gaming counters, brass registers. The city prospered loudly above the mines, but all that noise depended on teeth no wider than seed and springs no thicker than a thumbnail. That is the truth of machinery and also of households. The trade closed, for our line at least, on October 7th, 1950. I remember the date because the first snow showed on Mount Davidson that morning, and because my husband Archibald collapsed while trying to free the drawer on the Pike floor model, the full brass register under which you found this. He died 2 days later. Our only son, Samuel, had already been lost in the Pacific War aboard a transport off Leyte in 1944. My younger brother Thomas never returned from the Argonne in 1918, though his name is cut into a stone in a place I have never had strength to visit. After Samuel's telegram came, I kept the shop open 6 years by habit and spite. Then even spite became too heavy to lift. There were more than 30 years of silence before I wrote this. Silence between cousins over papers, silence between sisters over what was owed, silence in a workroom where no young hand came to learn. I do not know whether the person reading this is blood of my blood. I used to think that mattered most. Age has corrected me. Inheritance is not blood alone. It is the willingness to receive a duty without turning it immediately into display. If you mean to restore the registers, begin with cleanliness, not shine. Use cotton rags first, then mineral spirits sparingly, never soaking the paper amount flags. For brass, make a paste of rotten stone and oil, 4 parts to 1, and work with the grain of wear. Do not remove dark from the low places unless corrosion is active. Brightness is not honesty. For hardened oil in key banks, warm the parts no hotter than 160 degrees Fahrenheit. A kitchen thermometer will save you from pride. Steel springs may be relaxed in an oven at 500 degrees for 20 minutes only if already cracked beyond service. Otherwise clean, oil, and leave their temper alone. Drawer runners take a trace of graphite, not grease. Bell hammers must strike and retreat. If they rest on the bell, the sound dies young. When cutting new felt, use hide glue thinned 2 to 1 and let it set under weight overnight. The old machines prefer slow hands. The coins are not a fortune to spend. They are winter stored in metal. Sell only what keeps roof, chimney, water, and tools honest. The mining contract may be worthless or may not. Have the county read it before trusting any man who smiles too quickly. The medal belonged to Elias and was returned by Captain Henry Bell in 1866, after a delay no one explained. Keep it where it may be seen by someone who understands loss without making a speech of it. There is a horseshoe in the west walnut tree behind the shop, driven there by my father when I was 8 years old. Below it, under a flat stone. This is a marker for those whose names did not fit the public stones. If the tree still stands, greet them for me. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. Elspeth Voss Pike, November 14th, 1950. May reached the bottom and did not move. The stove took the last strip of crate wood with a small inward fall, and the heat plate made a ticking sound as iron expanded under flame. Outside, a wagon passed on the road, slower than a truck, its wheels making old sounds in fresh ruts. Somewhere beyond the wall, the yellow dog gave a single bark and then seemed to remember there was no need to continue. May read the letter again. The second reading was slower, not because the words were difficult, but because each one had acquired weight from the words around it. Hamburg, Placerville, Wilderness, Argonne, Leyte, Rottenstone, hide glue, slow hands, bell hammers must strike and retreat. A family could be carried in such sentences without raising its voice. When she finished, she folded the paper along the original creases one by one, not allowing herself to improve them. The blue thread had taken a curl from decades of holding. She wound it gently around the letter and slipped the knot beneath itself. Then she placed the letter inside the tin box, under the photograph and above the medal, as if arranging a small room where each object could rest without crowding another. Her hand remained on the lid after it closed. Not a prayer. Exactly. Only a keeping. The west walnut tree stood behind the shop where the ground lifted toward a scatter of rock and dried weeds. Mae took the letter's instruction with her, not the letter itself. She wore the thin coat, carried the small shovel from beside the stove, and walked out through the back door into light that had begun to warm the upper branches but had not yet reached the roots. The yard looked plainer by day than it had under stars. Bottles, tin scraps, frozen weeds, ash-coloured dirt. Yet beyond the lean-to, the two walnut trees held themselves with a gravity that made the broken fence seem almost respectful. The west tree was the larger, its trunk twisted and furrowed, bark dark where old sap had sealed injuries. At first she saw nothing. Then, around the far side, nearly swallowed by living wood, was the curve of iron, a horseshoe. The tree had grown around it for so many years that only half the arc remained visible, black against the bark, 2 nail heads still discernible, the rest taken into the trunk. Mae stood close and touched the exposed iron with 2 fingers. It was cold, though the morning had brightened. Beneath it, leaves had gathered in the hollow between roots, and snowmelt had crusted their edges. She cleared the leaves by hand. The flat stone lay where the letter said it would, no larger than a serving platter, sunk level with the dirt. It took work to lift because frost held the ground around it. Mae used the shovel to loosen the edge, then her hands, then the shovel again. When the stone finally rose, soil released with a soft, tearing sound. Beneath was not a grave in the formal sense. No coffin. No carved marker. Only a narrow slate set upright into the earth, protected by the flat stone above it. Its lettering had been scratched rather than cut, and time had softened the lines. Voss, Bell, P. Ike, Owens, kept home, Owens lost far. No dates. The absence of dates seemed deliberate. The marker did not separate them by year, by war, by age, by who had been considered important enough for public record. It gathered them under the tree in the order of being kept. Mae brushed dirt from the slate until her fingers were numb. "Good morning," she said. The words came out small, and the yard accepted them without echo. She set the flat stone back, not as before, but better seated, with earth packed around the edges to keep water from gathering. Then she remained there long enough for the sun to reach the horseshoe. When it did, the exposed iron showed a dull brown line, not shine, only survival. Inside the shop the stove needed feeding. Mae broke the remaining crate's slat into 3 pieces and chose the smallest. Wood must last until she found more. The flame accepted it, leaned briefly bright, then settled. From the tin box she took the brass loop with the cracked rim, one of the tools from the first package, and cleaned its glass with her breath and a square of soft cloth. It was not a lamp, it was not meant to hold flame, yet in the afternoon, when she searched the drawers near the bench, she found a beeswax candle wrapped in paper printed with a hardware name from Renault and a date stamped in purple ink, 1890. The wick had darkened but remained whole. She did not light it at once. 60 years, perhaps more, had waited in that paper, a candle that old is less an object for brightness than a compact with the hand that saved it. She set it in an iron holder near the workbench, trimmed the wick by the width of one breath, and at dusk touched a match to it. The flame came reluctantly, first a blue bead, then a thin gold tongue, then a steady oval hardly larger than a bean. The wax smelled faintly of honey and dust. Its light fell over the tools stamped with the crescent gear, over the ledgers, over her own hands blackened at the cuticles from soot and coins. Electric light would have shown more. The candle showed enough. Mae moved the medal case closer. She did not open it again. Some things should not be handled merely because a person has learned they exist. Instead, she placed it where the candlelight could reach the worn ribbon. Bronze held the glow quietly, without display. The room no longer seemed full of abandoned objects. It seemed full of unfinished introductions. As the candle burned, Mae found herself arranging the names of those who had carried her toward that workbench without knowing the whole distance. The woman in Fernley who had given saltines and told her the nights were colder near the river. The librarian in the grey cardigan who slid a pencil across the desk and allowed a damp-hemmed girl to copy an address. Mrs. Bell, who had written directions more fully than duty required and put the county's weight behind a deed that no one else wanted. Edwin Rusk, who had opened a ledger and called credit by its proper name instead of charity. None of them had rescued her. That made the kindness cleaner. They had each done a small exact thing, and then allowed her to keep walking on her own feet. A packet. A pencil. A name in a ledger. A warning written twice. Such things did not shine in stories told loudly. They did not turn a life all at once. They only held one plank while the next nail went in. And maybe you know that kind of kindness too. Maybe it was a paper bag left by a door, a ride offered without questions, a neighbour who fixed a hinge and did not mention the unpaid bill, a teacher who kept a classroom open 10 minutes longer because home was not ready for you. If you remember one, write it down in the comments, not the grand gesture, the small honest thing. Tell us who held one corner of the roof for you when the weather came in. Mae did not know anyone would ever speak of her. She did not know whether the shop would stand through spring, or whether the coins could be guarded from men with smoother papers than hers, or whether the mining contract was value, burden, or dust with signatures. But she had learned, from the letter and from the tree, that inheritance did not arrive as permission to become large. It arrived as a request to become careful. That night she prepared the room with more ceremony than comfort. The coins, rewrapped in their torn cloth, went into the hidden tray again, not fully closed but covered. The legal papers remained under the flour sack, weighted by the used bucket so that no draught could lift them. The tools were arranged on the bench from left to right. Loop, tweezers, screwdrivers, burnisher, spring winder, staking pieces. The ledgers lay beside them, square with the bench edge. The candle burned down 1 inch, and Mae pinched it out with wetted fingers before it could spend itself too quickly. She carried the tin box to the place where she had slept before, near the workroom threshold. Then, after a moment, she returned to the bench and brought the brass loop, the ebony-handled screwdriver, and the photograph of the woman standing beside the polished register. She set them beside the box on the floor, close enough that her hand could find them in the dark. Outside, the walnut branches scraped lightly against one another. Inside the room held the faint scent of beeswax, soot, cold paper, and old cedar. Mae lay down with the satchel beneath her head, the tin box against her ribs, and the heirloom tools aligned along the wall within reach. The floor was still hard, the roof still failed. The window still let in a thread of night air, sharp enough to wake her before dawn. But the shop was no longer mute. It had spoken in a letter, in a tool mark, in a horseshoe half swallowed by living wood. Mae closed her eyes and kept one hand on the tin box until sleep came, not quickly, not deeply, but without flight. The first snow that stayed came on December 6th. 4 inches by noon and another 2 after dark. It did not fall with drama. It came in a steady, nearly vertical hush, whitening the walnut limbs first, then the leaning fence, then the heap of broken glass behind the lean-to until every sharp thing wore the same soft face. Mae woke to the changed light before she heard anything. Because snow alters a room from the outside inward, it made the cracked window brighter. It softened the road. It covered the worst places in the yard and revealed the roof by burden. The tin had sagged farther in the rear corner. She stood outside in the cold with her hands under her arms and watched the low section collect snow differently from the rest. Good roofline shed, bad ones hold, the back corner held. Beneath it, in the workroom, the ceiling stain had darkened overnight, and one slow drip had started into the bucket she had set there after the last thaw. She did not climb that day. Instead, she sat at the workbench in her coat and read Chapter 4 of Rusk's County Repair booklet 3 times. Though the chapter title said, roof patching and light structural correction, and the author's tone suggested that a sensible person would hire help. Mae was not offended by sensible advice. She only noted where it did not apply. She copied the measurements from her own pacing and from a length of twine marked with knots. Front roof plane, 24 feet by 18 feet, minus chimney opening. Rear roof plane, 24 by 22, including lean to break. Pitch low, dangerous when iced. Existing tin sheets not all salvageable. South rear rafter soft. North edge curled. 4 feet of fascia gone. She drew a rectangle, then another, then marked the bad corner with a cross. Material calculation became its own evening. If replacing the worst tin with asphalt shingles over sheathing was cheaper than sourcing matching sheet metal, she needed enough to cover the failed rear plane first, not the whole roof at once. 3 bundles of 3-tab shingles would cover approximately 100 square feet each. Rear section with waist required 9 bundles if done properly, but the worst emergency section could be made weather-tight with 4. Roofing felt, 1 roll. Galvanized roofing nails, 1 1/4 inch, 5 pounds. Flashing near chimney, reused if sound, new if not. Sister rafter 1, 2x6, 12 feet, if Rusk had straight stock. Sheathing patch, 4 sheets, 1/2 inch exterior plywood, though the booklet warned plywood was a modern concession and not a beautiful one. Beauty could wait under a dry ceiling. At Rusk Hardware. Snow melted from her hem onto the floor while Edwin Rusk listened to the list without interrupting. He read her dimensions, took a pencil from behind his ear, and corrected 2 numbers. You forgot overlap. Mae looked at the page. I allowed 3 inches. Wind up here like 6. He changed the calculation. 4 bundles became 5. 1 roll of felt remained enough if laid without waste. Nails increased. Flashing would be judged after inspection. The 2x6 could be charged. The plywood could not all at once. I can patch with planks from the lean-to, Mae said. You can patch with anything if you enjoy doing work twice. He went into the rear of the store and returned with a roofing hatchet whose head was dark, blade carefully sharpened, gauge notch worn smooth by use. The handle had been replaced long ago with hickory and wrapped at the throat with black tape. Belonged to my father's brother, he said. He roofed every bad idea between here and Dayton. Mae did not reach for it. Rusk set it on the counter between them. Loan. Yes, sir. Bring it back with the edge covered. Yes, sir. And do not put your foot where your eye has not already been. That afternoon, while Mae was unloading shingles from a borrowed handcart beside the walnut trees, a man stopped at the leaning gate and watched without offering the large, cheerful help that often becomes command. He was perhaps 70, though his age had been dried by weather until the exact year mattered less than the grain of him. His name, given after a silence, was Nolan Greer. He had been a roofer before his knees stiffened and his sons moved to Elko. He wore a brown canvas coat, a wool cap pulled low, and gloves with the fingertips cut open. His face had the colour of old saddle leather, and his eyes were pale enough to seem almost without colour in the snowlight. Roof's wrong, he said. Mae stood with a bundle of shingles against her hip. Yes, sir. You know how wrong. Enough to be careful. Not enough to be proud. He looked at her for a long moment. Good. He came back the next morning carrying a lunch pail and a chalk line. Mae offered payment before he crossed the yard, because she had learned that unpaid help can grow teeth if not named early. Nolan shook his head once. Won't take pay. I can feed you oats. Had worse. That was the whole contract. For 11 days they worked when weather allowed and stopped when weather ordered it. Nolan did not speak to fill air. He spoke the way a nail enters wood, brief and meant to hold. He showed her how to brace the ladder, though neither trusted it fully. He had her work from the lower edge and from planks laid across sound rafters, never from the damaged tin. They stripped only the failed section first, lifting old sheets carefully, saving every piece of metal that could serve later as patch or flashing. Under the tin, The rear rafter had rotted along its top edge where water had entered at a seam. Nolan cut away the softest portion with a chisel and made her smell it. "Rot has a nose," he said. It did. Sweet, damp, and tired. They sistered the rafter with the 12-foot 2x6, clamping it tight against the sound portion, drilling pilot holes, then fastening with carriage bolts Rusk had chosen over nails because the old wood might split. Mae held the wrench below while Nolan tightened from above, his breath showing in short bursts. He taught her to sight along the line, not at the damage because repair had to agree with what the building should become, not with what failure had made of it. "Look long," he said. She looked. Now cut. The chalk line came next. Nolan snapped it across the felt with a blue mark so straight, Mae almost smiled. Shingles began at the lower edge with the tabs cut from the starter course, offset joints, 6-inch wind overlap, nails placed just below the seal strip, not too high, not too low. 3 strokes with the roofing hatchet when the wood was sound. First to set, second to drive, third to seat. More than 3 meant the wrist had lied or the nail had bent. "That nail's proud." Mae pulled it. Again. She set another. Too deep. She pulled that. 2. By the 4th day her thumb had a bruise beneath the nail and her shoulders ached so deeply that lifting the kettle felt like hauling chain. By the 6th she could set a shingle without Nolan correcting the line. By the 8th, snow returned and they spent the morning under the roof instead, watching for leaks along the patched seam while the stove warmed their boots and steam rose from their cuffs. One drip appeared near the chimney. Nolan marked it with a pencil. Flashing next thaw. Yes, sir. Not today. No, sir. He accepted oats at noon eaten standing near the stove. He brought his own salt in a twist of paper and used little. On the 10th day he told her the hatchet handle would need oil. On the 11th, under a sky so pale it seemed washed thin, they finished the emergency plane and set salvage tin along the transition to shed water away from the chimney until better repair could be made. Completion came on December 17th, not with triumph, but with the absence of dripping. That evening Mae stood in the workroom while meltwater ran from the roof edge outside and no bucket sounded beneath the ceiling stain. She moved the bucket anyway, because trust should be earned over several storms, but the floor beneath it remained dry. Nolan looked upward, then toward the stove. Good enough for winter. Mae wiped her hands on a rag. Thank you. He shrugged into his coat. Roof thanks straight work. At the gate, he stopped and tapped 2 fingers against the borrowed hatchet in her hand. Keep it till spring. Then he walked down the road with his lunch pail, leaving behind footprints that filled slowly with blue evening shadow. January made the chimney honest by worsening it. Cold tightened the bricks until old cracks showed their full length, and the first week of the new year brought a dry wind that pushed smoke back into the stove whenever Mae opened the door too quickly. The test fires had been clean enough for survival, but not for trust. Outside, near the roof patch, the chimney's upper courses showed spalling where brick faces had popped away in thin red scales. Mortar powdered under the touch on the inside wall, below the thimble. Soot had seeped through a hairline seam and made a dark feather on the plaster. Mae wrote chimney before every other task in the ledger. Rusk did not argue when she brought the list. He took off his spectacles, cleaned them on his shirt front, then asked whether she knew the difference between common mortar and mortar a chimney would forgive. She said she knew only enough to ask. That answer pleased him less than ignorance and more than confidence. He drew a cross-section on wrapping paper. Old brick wants lime, he said. Fire wants clay. Portland alone is too hard. It will crack the brick to save itself. The mix he gave her was measured in a dented coffee can, 3 parts clean sand, 1 part hydraulic lime, 1/2 part fire clay for the hotter joints near the thimble, water added slowly until the mortar held on a trowel without slumping. For repointing the exterior above the roofline, less fire clay, more lime. For packing around the stovepipe thimble, a stiffer mix, worked deep, not smeared on the face like cake frosting. He sold her what he could, and found what he did not sell in the back shed. a half bag of hydraulic lime, fire clay in a paper sack with the top folded and tied, sand from a barrel, dry and screened, a narrow pointing trowel worn almost elegant by use, a brick jointer, a wire brush, cold chisel, one pair of gloves too large, because her own fingers had cracked at the knuckles. The work took 3 weeks because winter does not hurry for need. Daytime temperatures held in the 20s, sometimes 26, sometimes 22, once 19 at noon when the sun stayed behind a lid of cloud. Morta disliked such cold, and Mae learned to work in small batches, warming water on the stove, keeping materials inside overnight, and covering fresh joints with burlap rusk gave her from seed sacks. She could not repair the highest courses alone in ice, so Nolan came twice, not to take over, but to stand on the ladder and tell her when her fear was useful and when it was only making her grip too tight. Handshakes. Climb down. She climbed down. Now breathe, she breathed. Again, she climbed again. The powdered mortar came out with patient scraping, rake the joint to sound material, half an inch deep if needed, more where failure ran farther, brush dust, mist lightly, not soak, because dry brick steals water from mortar before the lime can do its work. Press the new mix in layers with the trowel edge. Pack. Do not paint, strike the joint when thumbprint firm, cover from freeze. Her bare hands went numb every 15 minutes, even through torn gloves, because some tasks required the gloves off. She had to feel the joint fill. She had to know when mortar met resistance at the back. She kept a basin of warm water near the stove, not for comfort, but to bring feeling back before her fingers became clumsy enough to undo work. The first time the pain returned, she gripped the edge of the bench and waited until it passed from needles to ache. Then she went outside again. The chimney shed its worst weakness by increments. Spalled brick faces could not be made whole, but the loose ones were removed and reset where possible, with salvaged brick from the collapsed assay office, given by the neighbour with the yellow dog after he saw her carrying 2 broken bricks from the roadside and told her to take sound ones from his pile instead. His name was Everett. The dog's name was June, though no one explained why a yellow male dog had that name, and Mae did not ask. A useful name is a useful name. Inside, the thimble joint took the longest old stove cement had cracked away behind the pipe, leaving gaps where smoke could slip into the wall. Mae removed the pipe again, cleaned the opening, packed the lime fire clay mix around the thimble, and shaped the joint with wetted fingers until it lay tight and plain. She let it cure with no fire for 2 days, wearing 2 dresses and sleeping under every sack she owned. Those nights were the coldest inside since the first week. On January 28th, she made the test fire. Not a full fire, a paper twist first, then shavings, then 3 sticks split thin. She opened the damper, cracked the window, and held the flame low. Smoke rose, straight and clean. It did not hesitate at the thimble. It did not feather through the wall. Outside, she walked to the rear yard and looked up. A narrow line of smoke lifted from the chimney cap into the hard blue air, then broke apart above the roof without curling downward. Clean! She stood there until her ears hurt. When she came back in, the stove had begun to warm the room without suspicion. No bitterness on the tongue. No sting in the eyes. No dark seam on the plaster. Mae wrote in the ledger, chimney draft sound. Mortar holding. Continue observation. Then, after a pause, she added, late January. Smoke goes clean. Once the roof held and the chimney drew, the floors became impossible to ignore. They had spoken from the beginning, but now their voices were clearer. The front room carried a low complaint near the threshold where old water had entered under the door. The workroom had stains dark as tea beneath the former drip line, several boards near the counter cupped upward along their edges, catching broom straw and the toe of Mae's shoe. Yet when she knelt and scraped away the dirt with a dull knife, the wood beneath revealed itself as white pine, old growth, wide-planked, fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails whose heads had been hammered flat by a century of passing feet. It was better than she had hoped. Not perfect, but honest. Rusk rented the random orbit sander for $14 a day, a price that made Mae count twice before agreeing. She did not use coin from the cash directly, not yet. She took one damaged Morgan dollar to a dealer in town after Mrs. Bell gave the name quietly, sold it for a modest sum well below what better dates might bring, and wrote the amount in a separate ledger under Preservation Fund, roof, chimney, floor, water, legal reading. Not food beyond what kept the body working, not new clothing beyond patched necessity, not comfort for its own sake. The sander came in a wooden case with 3 cords, 2 worn pads, and a warning from Rusk to keep it moving, unless she wanted to carve moons into the floor. The first day was not sanding. It was preparation. Mae set every loose nail below the surface with a nail set and hammer, tapping around each rose head carefully because breaking an original nail for haste felt like poor manners. Where boards lifted, she tightened them with cut nails matched from Rusk's bins, drilling pilot holes by hand to avoid splitting the old pine. She marked fragile boards with chalk. She swept, vacuumed with a borrowed hand pump contraption from the hardware back room, then swept again. Dust from a century hides in seams the way secrets hide in family drawers. The first pass used 80 grit. The machine startled her with its eager trembling, wanting to run ahead, wanting to chew. Mae braced her feet, held the handle with both hands, and moved with the grain from wall to wall. Grey surface lifted into powder. Old finish, dirt, spilled oil, boot marks, and nameless stains blurred under the abrasive. She did not try to make the boards new. New would have been a lie. She wanted the floor clean enough to be trusted and scarred enough to remember. After 2 hours, her arms shook. After 4, the front room had changed colour from dead grey to dark honey in long, uneven bands. The second pass, 120 grit, softened the scratches left by the first and brought out knots black as old tobacco. The third, 220. She did only where feet would often pass and around the workbench where fine metal work required less grit rising under movement. Rusk had said 220 was excessive for a shop floor. Mae said she would rather sweep less dust into gears. He had grunted, which was not disagreement. The rental cost counted each day. She worked from dawn until lamplight failed. On the second evening, she returned the sander with the cord properly coiled and the case brushed clean. Rusk opened it, inspected the pads, and nodded once. You did not let it sit. No, sir. Floor forgive you. She carried home tongue oil, boiled linseed oil, and turpentine in amounts small enough to afford and large enough to begin. The first coat was thinned, half oil and half turpentine so it could enter the dry boards. She applied it with rags, working on her knees, rubbing until the wood drank evenly. The smell filled the shop, rich and sharp, pushing out mouse, soot, and cold dust. She kept the windows cracked despite the weather, because fumes were not less dangerous merely for smelling like work. 48 hours cure. That was what the tin said and what Rusk repeated. 48 hours, no cheating. Mae obeyed, though it meant walking along narrow paths of paper and sleeping in the back room with the stove low. The second coat brought the colour deeper, dark honey moving toward amber. The third, after another careful wait, made the oldest boards near the counter glow close to mahogany where decades of feet had compressed the grain. The floor did not shine like a parlour. It held light. The bad morning came after the third coat, before it had cured fully, when Mae woke with her body refusing the bargain she had made on its behalf. Her wrists ached. Her cough returned in a dry double pull. The scar of cold in her chest, earned from haylofts and depots, tightened when she stood. The shop waited with its usual inventory of tasks, each one reasonable alone and together a wall. She put water on the stove and forgot to drink it. Outside, the day was clear, hard, and windless. Melt from the roof had frozen into thin teeth along the eave. Mae stood by the workbench, looking at the ledgers and tools and tins and the pedestal register under canvas. And, for the first time since the letter, she did not begin. She walked instead. Beyond the road and below the tailings lay a low marshy place where runoff gathered before disappearing into culverts and gravel. In summer it might have smelled of mud and insects. In late January it smelled of ice, sedge, and mineral water. Mae sat on a flat stone at its edge with her coat wrapped around her knees. A great blue heron stood in the shallows. It was too early for such a bird, or perhaps only surprising to someone who had not lived there long enough to know the habits of water. It held itself on one leg, still as a tool laid down carefully. Then, with a deliberation that made every hurried human thing look foolish, it placed one foot forward through the thin water and waited, the long neck folded. The bill struck, a silver flicker vanished. Mae sat there until the sun moved past noon. She did not pray. She did not plan. She did not turn weariness into a lesson. She watched the heron take 3 more steps in an hour, each one exact, each one enough. The shop did not fall because she had left it. The world did not demand a receipt for the morning. When the wind rose, she stood, brushed grit from her skirt, and walked back slowly. That day, she did no work. The next morning she buffed the cured floor by hand with clean rags, and the pine answered with a low, settled warmth. Near the covered pedestal register, brass dust had gathered beneath the canvas edge. Mae swept it away gently. The old brass kept its silence, patient and waiting. February entered through the windows before any calendar told May it had come. Cold found glass with the instinct of water finding downhill. Of the 8 windows in the shop, 3 had no glass at all, only boards nailed from the inside by someone who had expected to return and never had. 4 were cracked, 2 from corner to corner, 1 in a spiderweb around a BB hole, and 1 with a long clean break that hummed when the wind pressed against it. The last window in the back room above the bench was older than the building's later repairs. Its glass wavered with bubbles and faint green edges, and a date scratched into the sash read 1888, though one county note in a former owner's hand had called it original, and no one had corrected the pride. Mae would not replace that pane. She cleaned it with water, vinegar, and a cloth so soft it was nearly gone. Through it, the world bent slightly. Walnut branches curved where they should have been straight. The road lifted at one edge. Her own reflection appeared narrow and uncertain, then disappeared when she moved. The other 7 demanded repair. Rusk sold her glass cut to measure after she brought him paper patterns made by pressing newsprint into each sash rabbet and marking the line with charcoal. He checked the measurements, reduced 2 by 1/8 inch, and said wood swelled whether a girl believed in swelling or not. DAP-33 glazing putty came in a squat can with a lid that fought opening. Glazier's points, 1 small packet, a glazing tool, loaned, 1 roll of 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, a handful of brass screws because the old ones had rusted into persuasion rather than fasteners. The first window taught humility. Mae removed the sash from the front left opening, labelling top-bottom, inside, outside with pencil, where later sanding would not erase the marks. The old putty had hardened into something closer to stone. She softened it with careful heat from a lamp held at a distance, then worked it free with a putty knife, taking care not to gouge the wood. Broken glass came out in sections, each wrapped in newspaper and set into the tin pail. The rabbets beneath were cleaned to sound wood, primed lightly with oil so the new putty would not dry too fast, then bedded with a thin rope of DAP-33. Glass lowered into place should not be persuaded with pressure. It should be invited evenly. Mae set the pane, pressed just enough to seat it in the bedding putty, then placed glazier's points with the flat tool, 2 on each side, more on the taller panes. The face putty came next. She rolled it between her palms until pliable, pressed it along the edge, and drew the glazing knife in one continuous angle from corner to corner. Her first line wavered. She scraped it off and began again. By the 3rd window, her bevels had steadied. By the 5th, she could feel when the putty was too cold and needed warming inside her hands before it would lie smooth. The work required less strength than roofing and less danger than chimney repair, but more visible truth. A bad roof might hide until rain. A bad putty line accused the hand every time light crossed it. The sash cords were more satisfying. The front right window had weights still in the pockets. iron cylinders hanging uselessly from broken cords inside the frame. Mae opened the access panel with a screwdriver, brushed out a nest of mouse-chewed fibre, and fished the first weight with wire. The 1/4-inch cotton cord felt clean and humble in her hand. She tied it to the weight with a figure-8 knot, pulled it snug, then tested the run over the pulley. The old brass pulley squealed once, accepted a drop of oil, and turned. For each sash, the cord had to be measured with the window at the right height, tied, tested, trimmed, and tucked. Too short, and the sash would not close. Too long, and the weight would strike bottom before the window opened. Exactness lived in such modest distances. Mae marked the successful length on the inside of the frame for whoever might one day need to know, then closed the panel with brass screws. The no-glass windows changed the room first. When the boards came down and glass went in, light entered places that had been guessing at morning for decades. The front showroom brightened enough for the faded lettering on the amusement cabinets to show red, blue, and a tired gold. The workbench lost its cave-like shadow. Dust became more visible, which meant it became more possible to remove. Mae washed each finished pane from inside and out, though the outside ladderwork she did only when the ground was thawed enough to hold. The original back window she saved for last, not to repair but to honour by not repairing beyond need. Its putty had cracked but still held. The sash cord on one side had broken, leaving it tilted slightly in the frame. She opened the pocket, retrieved the counterweight, and tied new 1/4-inch cotton with the same figure-8 knot she had used in the front. The pulley turned more smoothly than the others after one drop of oil, as if grateful to be asked rather than replaced. Outside that window, the west walnut branch came close to the glass. Mae had just lowered the sash and tested its balance when a chickadee landed on the branch not 3 feet from her face. It was a compact bird, grey-backed, black-capped, with a small body made rounder by cold. It turned its head once, then again, inspecting the newly clear pane and the girl behind it with equal seriousness. Mae remained still. The chickadee tapped one foot against the bark, fluffed itself, and gave a sound so small the glass nearly kept it from being heard. Then it flew to the horseshoe side of the tree and disappeared among the branches. The window stayed open at the exact height she had set. No stick propped it. No hand held it. Weight answered weight inside the wall, balanced by cord, pulley, knot, and patient measure. Mae rested her fingers on the sash rail and lifted it once more, then lowered it, listening to the quiet counterweight descend into darkness where it belonged. By evening, all 8 windows held against the wind. 3 new panes in once-boarded openings, 4 cracked panes replaced and glazed, 1 wavy 1888 pane cleaned, balanced, and kept. The shop did not become warm all at once, but the draughts no longer crossed the rooms like uninvited arguments. Light had edges now. The stove's heat remained longer. The brass machines along the wall stood under clearer winter brightness, their tarnish no longer hidden, their shapes no longer lost. Mae cleaned the glazing tool, closed the putty can tight, and wrote each window in the ledger by location and date. Then she sat at the workbench as dusk gathered, hands folded around a cup of hot water, watching the last light hold in the old glass until the room let it go. Late February found the walls. For weeks Mae had worked around them the way a careful person steps around pain in another household, seeing the damage without naming it too soon. The roof no longer leaked into the workroom. The chimney no longer breathed soot through its seams. The windows held their glass, and the floor had taken oil into its grain until the rooms seemed less like a shelter and more like a place willing to receive footsteps. But the plaster near the chimney had failed in 3 patches, each one shaped by a different history of water, heat, and neglect. The largest patch sagged above the stovepipe where smoke had stained the wall the colour of weak tea. The second had opened near the ceiling, showing a ribcage of hand-split oak lath beneath. The third, smaller but deeper, lay behind the workbench where a former leak had softened the surface until a thumb could break it away like stale bread. Mae did not tear down more than she had to. Original plaster, Aunt Winnie had once said of clock faces and enamel dials, was not something to remove for the satisfaction of making a clean beginning. It had earned its cracks. It had held weather, heat, hanging shelves, careless nails, and the pressure of years. Repair meant discerning what had failed from what had simply aged. The plaster was horsehair, lime-based, laid over oak lath split by hand and fastened with cut nails. When Mae brushed loose material away, she could see the hair strands still binding the grey-white body, fine, dark, and stubborn. The lath beneath had been riven, not sawn, its rough surface giving tooth to the first coat. She stood there with the lamp raised and felt, not for the first time, that even the hidden parts of the shop had been made by people who expected their work to matter after they were gone. Rusk provided the horsehair from a bag he had kept since the 1950s, though he admitted no sensible reason for keeping it, except that throwing away useful things offended him. The bag had sat on a high shelf in the hardware store, tied with twine and dusted by decades of indifference. When he set it on the counter, a faint barn smell rose from it, not unpleasant, only distant. "Not decorative," he said. "No, sir. Mix it through. Clumps make weakness. Yes, sir." The lime mortar for the plaster was gentler than chimney work. 3 parts fine sand, 1 part hydrated lime putty, horsehair teased apart by hand and folded through until the mix held together when lifted on the trowel. For the scratch coat, wetter and rougher. For the brown coat, firmer, built to 3/8 inch. For the finish, fine sand screened twice, 1/8 inch, smoothed but not polished. She wrote the ratios into the ledger before beginning, then wrote them again on the wall beside the patch in pencil, because a person working alone must sometimes leave instructions for herself in plain sight. The scratch coat went first. Mae misted the lath lightly so it would not rob the lime too quickly, then pressed the mix between and over the strips, forcing it to mushroom behind them where it could hold. The first trowel stroke fell off. The second sagged. She adjusted the water, worked smaller, pressed harder. When the coat had taken, she scored it in diagonal lines with a scrap of lath, roughing the surface so the next layer would grip. It looked worse before it looked better. Good repair often did. She waited. Lime did not take orders from impatience. It cured by slow conversation with air, drawing carbon back into itself, becoming stone by degrees. Mae kept the stove low, the room ventilated but not drafty, and the patches protected from freeze. After the scratch coat had firmed, she laid the brown coat to 3/8 inch, building the wall back toward level. 72 hours cure, she marked the time in the ledger. During those days she repaired drawer pulls, sorted screws, and practiced cleaning a brass plate that had no great value, learning again how easily shine can become damage. The finish coat was the one visitors would see, if visitors ever came. Mae mixed it in a basin, smoother than the others, and applied it with the broadest trowel she owned. It took a steadier hand than coin counting. Because every correction left evidence, she feathered the edges into the surviving plaster, not trying to hide the repair completely. A patch that pretends nothing happened has learned the wrong lesson. She wanted the wall to speak softly of mending. When the last surface had set to thumbprint firmness, she passed the damp trowel over it once more. Not glossy, not new. Sound. She stood back near the stove, hands white with lime dust, and studied the 3 places where absence had been filled. The wall was not perfect. The colour would dry lighter. Time would do what no hand could do in a day, settling the patches into the room with smoke, sunlight, dust, and ordinary use. "These patches will hold another 100 years, she said. The sentence had no audience except the shop. That was enough. Doris Vale owned the Silver Kettle Cafe and knew the county's hunger by its footsteps. She was the woman Mae had seen behind the fogged glass on her first morning in town, lifting biscuits in a pan while dawn had barely reached the upper windows. Doris was neither large nor frail, but built squarely, as if the years had learned there was no use trying to push her off balance. Her hair was brown, streaked with grey, and pinned with 2 black combs. She wore aprons made from flour sacks and kept a pencil tucked into the twist at the back of her head. If she smiled, she did so with one side of her mouth first, requiring the world to earn the rest. Mae did not become her friend in the way stories sometimes hurry friendship into warm rooms. For a long time, Doris merely noticed. She noticed Mae passing the cafe without entering, even when the smell of coffee and bacon drifted across the boardwalk. She noticed the hardware charges in Rusk's ledger, because half the town's practical life crossed her counter in conversation. She noticed the way Mae carried glass wrapped in newspaper, the way her coat sleeves grew patched, the way she bought oats and beans in quantities too exact to be comfortable. The first paper bag appeared on the shop doorstep on a Thursday morning. It was folded closed at the top and weighted with a smooth stone. Inside were 2 biscuits, 1 boiled egg, a bruised apple, and a small jar of coffee gone slightly stale but still coffee. There was no note. Mae stood holding the bag while the walnut branches clicked above her in a light wind. Then she carried it inside, divided the food into 2 meals, washed the jar, and returned it to the cafe porch the next evening after closing. The next bag came 3 days later. Mae waited until the 4th bag before entering the silver kettle with coins counted in her palm. Doris stood behind the counter slicing pie that smelled of dried apples and cinnamon. The cafe held 6 tables, oilcloth covers, a corkboard near the door, and a row of coffee cups thick enough to survive dropping. 2 men at the far table stopped speaking when Mae came in, then resumed more softly. "I owe you," Mae said. Doris did not look up from the pie. "For what?" "The bags. Could be anyone leaving bags. It was you. Then you are accusing me of poor hiding." Mae set the coins on the counter. Doris glanced at them, then at Mae's face. "No, I can pay a little. No, I do not take what I cannot account for." At that, Doris set the knife down. Her eyes were a deep hazel, direct without being sharp. "Then account this way," she said. "In candles when the shop reopens." Mae's fingers remained near the coins. "I do not know when that will be." "Neither do I." Doris pushed the money back with 2 flour-dusted fingers. "I can wait." After that, Mae found bags on days when weather was hard, never so often that pride had to defend itself, never so much that waste entered the matter. Beans, day-old bread, soup in a jar wrapped with cloth. Once a wedge of gingerbread so dark and fragrant that Mae cut it into 4 pieces and made it last 2 days. Each jar went back clean. Each cloth was washed, folded and returned. Doris never mentioned any of it unless Mae tried to pay. "In candles," she would say. Caleb Rusk arrived with a splitting maul over one shoulder and a Schwinn bicycle leaned against the fence. He was 15, perhaps 16, with wrists too long for his sleeves and a face still undecided between boy and man. His hair fell into his eyes no matter how often he shook it aside. The bicycle was red under scratches, its chrome dulled, one pedal wrapped in twine. Mae first saw him through the front window, standing outside in a thin jacket, staring at the leaning pile of stovewood behind the shop, as if it had insulted someone in his family. She opened the door. "He lifted the maul slightly," my mother said. Mae waited. "About your grandfather, that was all he had." Mae did not have a grandfather in the way he meant. The town had begun, through some quiet process of error and mercy, to connect her to the Voss name in ways she had not corrected at every turn. Perhaps it was easier for a boy to say grandfather than ancestor, or repairer, or the people under the walnut tree. Perhaps his mother had said exactly that and he had carried the sentence as given. "What did your mother say?" Mae asked. Caleb looked relieved to have a direct question. "That he fixed the cash drawer at my great-grandma's place and never charged because her husband was gone." Mae stood in the doorway with cold crossing her ankles. "That would have been before me." "Yes." "Ma'am." "I cannot pay much." He frowned, almost offended. "I didn't ask." The maul came down on the first round with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Mae showed him where the checking had opened, how to set the blade into the existing split, how to stand with feet clear of the arc. He listened the way some boys listen, only when instruction is attached to a tool. By the 4th round he had improved. By the 10th, he had removed his jacket and laid it over the fence. He worked after school when weather allowed, splitting rounds Everett had brought from a fallen limb and stacking them under the lean-to with bark side up where possible. Mae offered coins once. Caleb shook his head so quickly his hair fell over both eyes. My mother said no money. Your mother is precise. She is mostly loud. Mae almost smiled, but only turned the next round for him. In time, Caleb began asking questions about the machines at first from the doorway, then from inside, standing with hands in pockets, careful not to touch. The racing horse amusement cabinet caught him most. Mae explained coin slides and escapements, how a nickel could release stored spring tension for one brief motion, how the machine had to reward curiosity without cheating gravity. Caleb listened with his mouth slightly open, then closed it when he noticed. Could it run again? Probably when it deserves to. He accepted that, though not happily. Reverend Boyd was the third kindness, and the most difficult to categorize. He was not the minister of a grand church, only of the white chapel down the road whose bell had cracked sometime in the 1970s and been rung gently ever since. Reverend Samuel Boyd walked past the register shop every morning at nearly the same hour, not because his route required it, but because he had chosen a route that passed several houses where people lived alone. He was tall, stooped through the shoulders, and wore a black coat polished at the cuffs. His beard was trimmed close. His hat, always dark, had a band faded by weather. The first week, he only tipped the hat. Mae saw him through the front glass and tipped her head in return. Because she had lime on both hands and no wish to open the door, the next morning he passed again. Hat lifted. Head inclined. No speech. After that, the gesture became part of the day's structure, like pumping water or clearing ash. On a morning of hard wind, he stopped while Mae was carrying a pail of broken plaster to the yard. Morning, he said. Morning. Work holding. So far. He looked at the roof, the chimney, the windows, not as a critic, but as a man reading evidence of labour. Then he tipped his hat and walked on. A week later, when Mae had burned her wrist on the stove plate and was wrapping it in cold cloth, she heard his boots pause outside. Through the glass she saw his head bow. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a performance of the doorway. The words came through the pane so quietly that she nearly missed them. Mercy keep this house. 4 words. Then he walked on. Mae did not know whether she believed the prayer as he believed it. She did not know whether houses could be kept by mercy in any formal sense, but the words remained in the room after he passed, settling among the tools, the patched plaster, the hidden coins, and the machines waiting under canvas. They asked nothing in return. That made them easier to receive. Mae postponed the cellar until February 11th. She gave herself reasons, all of them sound. The roof first, because water descends, the chimney next, because fire kills faster than damp, floors before cellar, because every carried load crossed them, windows before deeper searching, because wind steals heat from hands, plaster before dust, wood before curiosity. Each reason was true, but beneath them lay another truth, quieter and less practical. The cellar door had waited since the first night, half hidden in the back room corner. It was narrow, made of vertical boards reinforced by 2 cross battens, and held shut by an iron thumb latch dark with rust, no lock, no warning sign, only a draught at the bottom that smelled of stone, cold earth, and a kind of stillness different from the rooms above. Mae had opened many stuck things in her life, but not all closed places asked to be opened at once. On February 11th, after lunch of beans and bread from Doris's last paper bag, she set the lamp on the floor, tested the latch, and lifted. The door opened with less protest than expected. 7 granite steps descended into darkness. Each step was worn shallow in the middle, not by many people recently, but by many feet long ago. Fieldstone walls closed around the stairwell, mortared in rough courses, damp shining in the joints. Mae held the lamp low and placed 1 foot on the first step, then shifted weight gradually. Sound, second step, sound, third, a faint hollow beneath, but not structural. She marked that in memory and continued. The cellar measured 12 feet by 15, as near as she could pace it. The floor was fieldstone, uneven but dry except along the north wall where mineral damp had left white bloom. Shelves stood on two sides, their lower boards warped, upper boards intact. There were crocks, 3 empty, 1 cracked, a wooden crate of bottles, 2 coal scuttles, a box of broken pulleys, a rack for tools long removed. Cobwebs lay thick in the corners, not delicate but ropey, silvered with dust. The air was cold enough that her breath showed. At the centre of the cellar floor lay a single dressed granite slab. It did not match the fieldstone around it. Its edges were cut square, its surface smoother, and in the centre had been carved the crescent gear mark with the dot at its heart. Not large, no larger than her palm, but deliberate. Mae held the lamp closer. The slab had no visible ring, no pry notch, no hinge. Its weight would have been considerable, and the cellar gave no sign that lifting it alone would be anything but foolish. She swept dust from the carved mark with a rag, revealing the clean depression of toolwork beneath. Then she stood and looked at it until her knees reminded her of the cold. "Not today," she said. The words were not fear, they were order. She did not lift it. Instead, she inventoried what could be reached and understood: coal dust, bottles, 1 crock usable for water if cleaned, pulleys corroded but pattern-worthy, a bundle of lath scraps, a crate of newspapers from 1946, 2 lengths of brass rod blackened by age, no food worth saving, no hidden drawer, no further miracle offered simply because she had descended. On the way up, her foot touched the 3rd step and heard the slight hollow again. Mae stopped. She set the lamp on the 4th step, crouched, and ran her fingers under the front lip of the 3rd. Stone above, wood wedge beneath, an odd repair. Her fingers met something squared, dry, and not part of the stair. She worked slowly, loosening dust and grit with the awl. A small oak box slid forward 1 reluctant inch, then another, until she could draw it free. It was no wider than 2 hands and shallow, with a sliding lid. No lock. Only a brass pin, darkened nearly black. She carried it upstairs before opening it, not from superstition, but because some discoveries belong first in daylight. At the workbench, beneath the cleaned 188 window, she brushed the lid and slid it back. Inside lay a brass key and a tintype photograph. The key was unlike the one from the tin box. Its bow had been shaped as the crescent gear, the opening round with a small central bar representing the dot. The stem was long, the bit complicated, with cuts at 3 depths. It did not belong to any drawer Mae had yet found. It had the air of something made for a place, rather than bought for a lock. The tintype was wrapped in cloth and had survived with only a few scratches. It showed a young woman standing in front of the shop in summer light, though the roofline was sharper then and vines grew along the fence. She was 25 perhaps, with dark hair pinned back, a high-collared blouse and a work apron tied at the waist. In one hand she held a small spring winder, the other rested against the door frame. Her face struck Mae with such force that she sat down. Not identical. No, but close enough that the room seemed to tilt. The same direct brow, the same set mouth held not hard but steady, the same quiet distance in the eyes as though she had been listening to something just beyond the camera. Mae had seen family resemblance in Aunt Winnie's hands, in the photograph from the tin box, in names written into papers. But this was different. This was the shock of finding one's own expression waiting in another century. On the back, written in black ink, Clara Voss, daughter of Matthias Voss, age 25, summer of 1903. Mae read it twice. Clara Voss, daughter of Matthias, the founder's daughter, or near enough to that word that the shop itself seemed to have kept her. She placed the tintype beside Elspeth's photograph and saw the line not as genealogy alone, but as posture passed forward through work. Women standing in front of the same building. Hands on tools, faces unwilling to perform softness for the camera, but not closed to kindness. The brass key she set on the mantel above the stove. At first she tried to match it to visible locks, counter cabinet, drawer tags, amusement machines, rear door, cast iron safe. Though the safe stood open and did not need it, none accepted the bit. The key remained unexplained, catching firelight along its crescent bow in the evenings. A question shaped by someone who had trusted the future to have patience. Mae let it stay unanswered. Snow retreated by loosening its grip before it disappeared. First the road showed through in brown ruts, then the fence posts emerged with dark rings around their bases. The roof began to shed water in steady lines during the afternoons, and ice that had hung from the eaves thinned until it broke under its own memory of weight. By mid-March, the runoff behind the shop had become a true sound, not the winter's thread of water, but a lively creeklet rushing through sedge and gravel, loud with snow melt from the higher ground. The walnut trees changed last. Their branches held winter in their shape even after the ground softened. But one morning Mae saw catkins hanging in pale green-brown tassels where bare twigs had been. She stood beneath them with the water bucket in one hand, watching them sway. No blossom announced itself. No bright leaf opened. The tree simply began. Spring did not make the shop finished. It made unfinished work visible in better light. The sign still hung by one chain, though Caleb had promised to help lower it when school let out. The front counter needed glazing. The amusement cabinets had not yet been opened beyond inspection. The pedestal register remained frozen, though its hidden tray had been cleaned, repaired, and closed again with the coins and papers sealed inside. The cellar slab waited under the carved mark. The brass key on the mantel had not found its lock. The pump gave water more readily but needed new leather. The privy required levelling. The rear yard still held broken bottles that surfaced whenever mud softened. Yet the rooms had crossed a line. They no longer felt borrowed from ruin. They had begun to require decisions of a different kind. Mae had thought during the coldest weeks that spring would be the season when she began the craft in earnest. She had imagined laying out tools under the back window, cleaning the racing horse cabinet, freeing the register keys, polishing brass not to brightness but to legibility. She had imagined the first drawer bell ringing clear after 70 years of silence, but when March became April and the light lengthened across the workbench, she found that her hands were not ready to begin on the heirloom machines. Not from inability. From respect. She would practice first on broken plates with no provenance, on scrap brass, on drawer runners beyond saving. She would order materials with one coin, a common date sold carefully and recorded in the preservation fund, and she would waste mistakes where no ancestral hand had left its mark. Rotten stone, oil, fine files, shellac flakes, hide glue, graphite, proper spring steel, glass cut for amount windows, cotton gloves, paper tags, small quantities, correct quantities. No extravagant buying because money hidden for decades deserves a slow release. At night, after chores, she studied Elspeth's technical pages and copied diagrams until her pencil dulled. She practiced lettering tags in the style of the shop's older labels. She learned which screws in the ODD screws drawer were truly odd, and which were merely waiting for their machines to be known. She cleaned the spring winder and made 3 sample coils from ruined steel, each better than the last and none worthy of use. Doris's paper bags ceased as Mae's own pantry steadied, but jars still appeared occasionally, now labelled trade in pencil. Caleb came by twice a week to split wood, sweep the yard, and ask whether the racing horses had run. Reverend Boyd continued to pass in the mornings, tipping his hat to the windows now clear enough to answer with reflected light. Rusk inspected the roof after the first spring rain and said only, "Still there." Nolan Greer, when told, said roof's job. On April 12th, Mae lowered the front sign with Caleb's help and carried it inside. Pike Sons. Mechanical registers. Coin devices repaired. The paint had flaked, the wood had split at one corner, and the chain hole had rotted wide. She set it on the workbench and brushed away dirt with a soft whisk. Sons, the word said. Sons had been the shape of expectation. printed large enough for the road to read. But daughters had stood in photographs, had written ledgers, had hidden letters, had kept tools. Mae did not alter the sign, not yet. She only turned it over and wrote on the back, in pencil, the date it came down and the condition in which it was found. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, the first completed piece sat under the back window on a square of clean felt. It was not the great pedestal register. Mae had not touched that machine beyond preservation, documentation, and the freeing of 2 exterior screws whose corrosion had threatened the case. The first completed piece was the smaller racing horse amusement cabinet, the one Caleb had watched from the doorway with more hunger than he showed for Doris's biscuits. Its painted horses had been cleaned with cotton swabs and patience until red, chestnut, black and cream emerged from beneath nicotine-coloured film. Its coin slide had been rebuilt from 2 salvaged parts and 1 new brass guide filed by hand. Its spring had been cleaned, measured and replaced with steel wound to match the old tension, not stronger, because stronger can become a form of disrespect. Mae had spent 6 weeks on the bell alone. The first strike had been dull. The hammer rested too long. Elspeth's line returned then, not as memory for memory's sake, but as instruction. Bell hammers must strike and retreat. If they rest on the bell, the sound dies young. Mae adjusted the spring, polished the pivot, filed 1 contact surface by the width of a breath, and tried again. The second strike rang brighter. The third, after a final correction, gave a clear small note that rose into the rafters and seemed surprised to find the room listening. The horses ran on December 9th. Caleb stood beside the workbench, taller by then, his shoulders beginning to catch up with his wrists. Doris had come too, claiming she needed to see whether candle credit had matured into entertainment. Rusk stood near the stove with his hands in his pockets. Reverend Boyd paused outside but did not enter until Mae opened the door and asked him in. Nolan Greer declined the walk in the cold but sent word through Caleb that if the roof had not fallen, the horses probably deserved their chance. Mae placed a nickel in the slot. The coin dropped, struck the slide, released the spring, and 4 tiny horses moved around the oval track under glass, clouded no longer by neglect. They did not race quickly. Their motion was deliberate, charming in its restraint, each one advancing through the mechanism's measured argument. At the finish, the cream horse stopped 1 notch ahead of the red, and the little bell gave its clear sound. No one clapped. That would have been wrong. Doris put 1 hand over her mouth, then lowered it and said, "Well." Rusk nodded once. Caleb breathed out as if he had been underwater. Reverend Boyd looked toward the ceiling. Mercy kept it. Mae wrote the date on a paper tag and tied it inside the cabinet where no customer would see. The interior of the shop had become a record of quiet decisions. The front room held the repaired floor, dark honey under foot traffic, with mats placed only where water might come in. The glass counter had been reglazed, its lower shelf lined with brown paper and arranged with cleaned keys, sample tags, small polished plates, and 3 repaired drawbells not for sale. The amusement cabinets stood along the left wall, 1 restored, 2 conserved and waiting. The 4 smaller registers had been moved onto reinforced stands, Caleb and Rusk built from salvaged oak. Each wore a tag, condition maker, date if known, work completed, work pending. No claim exceeded the evidence. The great pedestal register remained at the rear, under no canvas now. Mae had cleaned its exterior enough to halt corrosion and reveal the maker's name, but the keys still stood frozen halfway down. The hidden tray below it had been repaired, sealed and documented. The coins were no longer stored there. Neither were the legal papers. The tray now held copies, notes, and 1 folded sheet explaining what had been found, because hidden things once known should not become traps for the next careful hand. The workroom was cleaner than it had been in any living memory the town possessed. Tools hung where ghost outlines had once been. Some outlines remained visible around them, and Mae had chosen not to scrub them away. The bench surface had been oiled but not sanded smooth enough to erase burns. Above it, under the wavy 1888 window, she had mounted the photographs. Clara Voss with the spring winder, Elspeth beside the polished register, Aunt Winnie's recovered copy of a photograph Mrs. Bell found in an archive box after a winter of searching county files. 3 women, 3 kinds of waiting. The cellar slab still lay untouched. Mae swept around it monthly, kept the carved crescent gear free of grit, and wrote in the ledger each time she inspected it. She had learned enough by then to understand that not every mystery is improved by immediate opening. The granite held its place in the centre of the cellar floor, square and calm. The shop had already given more than one young life could carry at once. The brass key from the stairbox remained on the mantel until the walnut tree yielded its answer. It happened after an ice storm in the winter's 2nd year, when one of the lower branches cracked under weight, and Caleb came with a saw to help remove it before it tore bark from the trunk. Mae stood with him beneath the west tree, watching where the branch had split near the old horseshoe. The exposed wood showed a dark oval beneath a seam of bark too regular to be rot. Caleb touched it with one gloved finger. "That's not tree," he said. Mae brought a brush, a dull knife, and the lamp, though it was morning. They cleared only loose bark, careful not to wound the living wood beyond what the storm had already opened. Under the grown-over edge, set into the trunk like a swallowed promise, was a small brass plate, green with age. Almost hidden at its centre was a keyhole shaped, not like a modern lock, but like a narrow crescent with a round cut above it. The key on the mantel had waited nearly 2 years for that shape. Mae did not turn it while Caleb held his breath over her shoulder. She first cleared the keyhole with a soft pick, then warmed the brass key in her hand because frozen metal can punish old locks. The stem entered halfway, stopped, then entered fully when she lifted the bow slightly. She turned it not with force but with steady pressure. Inside the tree, something released. A panel no wider than a book opened along a seam disguised by bark. Behind it was a copper-lined hollow, dry, dark, and smelling faintly of resin. Within lay a folded 48-star American flag, wrapped in oilcloth, and a note sealed in a paper envelope. The flag was small, hand-stitched, its stars arranged in rows that fixed it to the years after 1912 and before Alaska and Hawaii joined the country. Mae carried both inside before unwrapping them fully. The note was dated November 11th, 1918. Armistice Day. The handwriting was not Elspeth's. It was broader, with stronger pressure and less room between lines. To the one who keeps the shop after the guns stop, Thomas will not come home. The telegram says Argonne, though paper cannot say what mud and iron have done to him. I have put this flag here because public flags belong to speeches, and this one belongs to the bench where he learned to file brass without chatter. He was my brother before he was a soldier. Remember that order. If another war takes another one of us, put their name near his. If peace comes and stays, leave this folded and be grateful without boasting. Clara Voss. Mae read the note standing beside the workbench where Clara's photograph hung. Then she took down the ledger and turned to the page where she had copied Elspeth's words about Samuel Lostoff Leyte in 1944, Thomas in the Argonne in 1918, Elias in 1864. She did not add names quickly. Instead she prepared a new page titled Kept and Lost, and wrote each one with source, date and uncertainty marked plainly where uncertainty remained. Elias Voss, service tag 1064, medal returned 1800 in 1866. Thomas Voss, Argonne, note dated November 11th, 1918. Samuel Pike, transport off Leyte, telegram referenced by Elspeth, others unknown. A record is not grief, but it can keep grief from being misplaced. The medal went to the cemetery on Memorial Day, May 27th, 2024. Mae chose the Silver Terrace cemeteries above Virginia City because Mrs. Bell had found a family plot reference there, though not every name had a stone. The morning was bright and windy, with desert light striking the grave markers until inscriptions appeared and vanished as one walked. Mae carried the bronze medal in its worn case, wrapped in a clean cloth and a small jar of water for washing dust from the stone that bore the Voss name. Reverend Boyd came, not to lead a service, but because he knew the path. Doris sent a paper packet of biscuits, Rusk sent a soft brush, Caleb carried the folding stool and did not complain. They found the marker after 20 minutes of searching. May cleaned it with water and the soft brush. No harsh scraping, no chalk, no attempt to make age readable by injuring it. She opened the medal case and set it on the stone for the time it took the wind to move once through the dry grass. Reverend Boyd said 4 words, the same ones as before, altered only by place. "Mercy keep them home." Then May closed the case and carried it back. The medal did not belong to the cemetery permanently. Not yet. It belonged where the letter had asked it to be seen by someone who understood loss without making a speech of it. In the shop, it rested in a shallow case beneath the counter, beside Clara's note and a copy of Elspeth's letter. No price, no display card bright enough to cheapen it, only a typed line, "Returned after war, kept with the work." The money remained mostly untouched. May spent 3 coins in the first year and 2 in the second, each sold separately, each recorded by date, buyer, condition and purpose. 1 common Morgan for roof and chimney materials, 1 worn $half toward legal reading of the mining contract, 1 damaged $1 for pump leather and sash cord. Later, 2 more common coins for insurance, archival boxes and proper storage sleeves. Not 1 rare Carson City strike left the reserve, not 1 gold piece. The rest of the cash was sealed in a bank box under 2 signatures, May's and Mrs. Bell's, with a written instruction packet for whoever might legally follow when May no longer could. The mining contract, when read by a quiet attorney in Carson City recommended by no one smiling, proved real but complicated. It did not make May wealthy. It gave her a fractional inherited interest in a narrow parcel behind the town. Mineral rights burdened by abandoned claims, environmental restrictions and survey confusion. The attorney suggested it might one day matter if land records were cleaned properly. May asked what it required now. He said patience, modest fees, and no quick sale that suited her. She filed the papers. No announcement followed. The shop reopened through a 3x5 index card pinned to Doris's cafe corkboard. Mechanical assessment by appointment. No modern electronics. Slow work only. M. Voss. South Road. Doris insisted the card was too modest. Mae removed one word from it rather than add any. Rusk stood before the corkboard, read it, and said, "Slow work only." "That will scare fools," Doris said. Good, the card remained. The first customer brought a cash drawer from a ranch supply store, its bell mute and its drawer refusing to close unless struck. Mae repaired the bent runner, cleaned the bell hammer, and charged less than Doris thought sensible, but more than Mae would have charged out of fear the year before. The second brought a barber's till. The third, a hotel register used only for display until the owner heard the bell ring and changed his mind. Letters came after that, not many, but steady. Reno, Carson City, Ely, a saloon museum in Austin, a family in Winnemucca, with a coin-operated fortune machine in a shed. By winter. The mailing list held 43 names. Doris kept it in a small notebook behind the cafe counter for people who did not trust the mail slot at the shop. Mae kept the true list in her ledger, written by hand, no advertisements beyond the corkboard card. No newspaper feature, though, one reporter asked, and was politely refused. No grand opening, no ribbon. On certain mornings the front shade was lifted halfway, and those who knew to look understood that the shop was receiving work. Candles stood on the counter. 2. Mae made them from beeswax bought locally and poured in small moulds, the first repayment to Doris and then a habit. Each candle had a paper band stamped with the crescent gear mark, not as branding, but as a way of keeping hands in order. Doris sold them beside the register at the Silver Kettle and took payment only after Mae forced a ledger between them. "In candles," Doris said the first time, placing the original debt back on the counter in the form of a joke that had ripened into affection. "In dollars now," Mae answered. Doris allowed it, with poor grace. Caleb returned with the sign in late spring. He had been working on it without permission, which he seemed to understand only after arriving at the gate with the object wrapped in a blanket and strapped awkwardly to his Schwinn bicycle. He had grown taller again, and the bicycle looked almost insulted by the length of him. He leaned it against the fence, untied the blanket, and stood aside as if presenting evidence in court. The sign was carved from 2 joined boards of walnut. Not new lumber, fallen branch from the west tree, cured near the stove, planed at Rusk's under supervision, carved at Caleb's kitchen table in evenings when homework had either been done or convincingly postponed. The letters were not perfect, that saved them. They had the slight irregularity of a living hand learning restraint. Voss daughters, mechanical registers, brass devipses repaired. Daughters, plural. Mae looked at the word longer than Caleb could comfortably endure. "I can change it," he said. "No, I know you don't have—" "No," she said again, but gently enough that he stopped. The old sign, Pike Sons, had been conserved and hung inside on the right wall, its flaked paint stabilized, its original claim preserved because erasure would have been another form of dishonesty. But the new sign spoke to the road. It did not accuse the old one. It answered it. "Why plural?" Mae asked. Caleb shoved both hands into his pockets. "Because it was never only one." That was the first sentence he had spoken in months that sounded older than he was. Rusk helped hang it because ladders and signs invite stupidity when pride takes the upper rung. Nolan Greer came despite his knees and sat on a chair by the fence, giving instructions no one had requested, and everyone followed. Doris brought coffee in a thermos. Reverend Boyd stood across the road with his hat in both hands. The new sign went up under a clear sky. Its walnut surface held light differently from paint. The carved letters made shadows even at noon. When the wind moved, the sign did not clatter on one chain as the first had. It hung from 2 iron brackets, level, steady, and plain enough to be believed. That evening, after everyone had gone, Mae stood in the road and read it from a distance. Voss daughters. No fame came from it, no crowd gathered, no lost relation arrived with apologies, no grand wealth transformed the shop into something polished beyond recognition. The roof still needed watching, The pump still complained in cold. The great pedestal register still waited for the season when Mae's hands, knowledge and courage would be equal to opening its mechanism fully. Orders came slowly, payment came unevenly. Some days the work was too delicate for tired eyes, and she left it covered until morning rather than let need spoil what patience had saved. That was the life. It was enough to keep. On the 2nd anniversary of the deed, Mae began her own letter. She used Elspeth's bench, Clara's photograph, Aunt Winnie's loop, and a sheet of heavy paper bought from the stationer in town. She sharpened a pencil first, then decided pencil could be altered too easily, and filled the fountain pen Mrs. Bell had given her when retiring from the clerk's office. The pen had signed deeds for 31 years. Its nib knew the pressure of consequence. Mae wrote the first line and stopped. "My dear one, whoever you are." The words belonged to Elspeth, but they had been meant to travel. Mae sat with them until the stove settled and the walnut branches darkened beyond the 1888 glass. Then she continued. She did not write a grand history. She wrote what she knew, how the roof was patched and where the sister rafter lay, which window held original glass and must not be replaced for convenience, which coins had been sold and which remained sealed, which attorney had read the mining contract without smiling too quickly, which ledger contained the machine diagrams, which drawer held the odd screws that were not odd once a person understood their homes, how to warm hardened oil, and how not to polish away the low dark places in brass, how Caleb had carved the sign, how Doris's kindness should be repaid in candles if money failed, how Rusk disliked fools but would loan tools to people who returned them clean, how Reverend Boyd's forward prayer had stayed in the walls. She wrote also that no one should lift the granite slab alone, not because mystery needed performance, but because the floor beneath it might be older than any of them knew, and old weight deserved witnesses. She wrote that the pedestal register remained unrestored by choice, not neglect. She wrote that the future should not confuse delay with fear. Care often looks like waiting to those who worship speed. The letter grew over weeks. She added pages when work taught her something. She crossed out little, preferring to begin a sentence again below, rather than make the page appear cleaner than the living of it had been. At the end she left space for dates not yet arrived, machines not yet opened, names not yet known. A letter for an inheritor should not pretend the current keeper finished everything. Finished is sometimes only another word for abandoned by the impatient. Near the closing, on a March evening with rain touching the roof but not entering, Mae looked toward the row of machines and heard the room as she had first heard it, before coins, before letters, before windows and plaster and the new sign. The same contained hush remained, altered by heat and work, but not erased. The old brass kept its silence, patient and waiting. She dipped the pen again and wrote the final paragraph. If you are reading this because you need shelter, begin with the roof. If you are reading because you need money, begin with the ledger. If you are reading because you need belonging, begin by sweeping the floor and learning which boards complain. This place does not give itself to hurry. It asks for hands that can be corrected. It asks for names to be kept without turning them into chains. The shop is not empty. It was not empty when I arrived, though I did not know how to hear it yet. She signed not with ceremony, but with clarity. Mae Eleanor Voss, South Virginia City Road, March 31, 2025. Then she folded the pages along clean lines, tied them with blue thread saved from Elspeth's letter, and placed them in an archival envelope, not hidden beneath the register, not sealed in a place no one might find for 70 years. She set it in the top drawer of the workbench, marked plainly, "For the next keeper." Some inheritances must be hidden to survive their first danger. Others must be labelled so they will not become danger again. The brass register shop waits. It has always waited. It waited through silver booms and empty winters, through saloon noise and museum quiet, through men who printed suns on signs and women who kept the actual tools. It waited under tin patched against snow, behind glass that bent the walnut branches, above a cellar slab marked with a crescent gear. It waited with coins sealed away not for luxury, But for the next necessary repair, it waited with a flag folded in a living tree, a medal returned after war, a note asking that a brother be remembered first as a brother. It waited with cash drawers stuck, bells muted, horses frozen mid-race, and screws sorted in the wrong compartments until a patient hand could name them again. In the retired county clerk's desk, in the middle drawer beneath a stack of blank envelopes, the $5 bill remained. Mrs. Ada Bell had not spent it. She had written paid in the ledger, stamped the deed, and later, after leaving office, taken the worn bill home in an envelope marked Retschke's shop transfer. George Washington's face was still pale along the fold. The paper had softened from handling, but the serial number remained readable. Sometimes, when May came by with a jar of candles or a question about a record, Mrs. Bell would open the drawer and look at it after May left. Not as money, as proof that a small, honest thing, placed on a counter at dusk, can hold open a door wider than anyone present is able to see.